Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's dialogue, part of the University of Queensland Global Development Dialogue series. My name is Penny Tawake. I'm a partnership broker and international development consultant, and I'll be MC for today and facilitating today's plenary discussions. So welcome to today's dialogue. Our theme today is strengthening partnerships with the Pacific. As a Pacific Islander, a partnership broker, this is a subject I'm passionate about, so I look forward to today's plenary and small group discussions about ways of strengthening partnerships with the Pacific. We have quite a packed schedule today, so we'll get right into it. I'd like to now invite Professor Aidan Byrne, Provost of University of Queensland, to give the welcoming address. Thank you, Professor Byrne.
Look, thank you, Penny. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and the custodianship of the lands on which we all meet today. On behalf of the University of Queensland, I pay our respects to their ancestors and their descendants who continue cultural and spiritual connections to country. We recognise their valuable contributions to Australia and global and Pacific society. Look, thank you everyone for being here to contribute to what I think is a very important discussion on strengthening partnerships with the Pacific Islands region. I want to offer a particularly warm welcome to our guests, in particular His Excellency Vile Whare, Vanuatu's High Commissioner to Australia, and Ms. Easter Chu-Shing, Deputy Director General Secretariat of Pacific Regional Environment Programme. But welcome also to all our guests from Fiji, Kiribati, New Caledonia, Niue, Samoa, and Vanuatu, and you'll be introduced by our MC shortly. It's wonderful to see so many contributions to industry, government, and research from Australia and the Pacific. We appreciate that you have taken the time to join us here today. I'm delighted to be opening this event and offer my sincere thanks and appreciation to everyone who's offered their expertise and support of strengthening relationships with the Pacific. Today's program will explore key challenges through 4 different lenses: development practice, research collaboration, teaching, and government and industry engagement. We feel generally privileged to support this growing network of development impact professionals, and we encourage you to contribute your ideas and insights this afternoon and further expand the connections between organisations in Australia and the Pacific. The Pacific region and its people have always been of great importance to the University of Queensland. As close international neighbours, our people-to-people links are helping us understand one of the most biodiverse regions in the world and to protect the oceans, crops, animals, and communities that rely upon it. The university welcomes students from all over the Pacific every year and has a network of more than 2,000 alumni currently living there. Around 35 of our academic staff were born in the Pacific, many of whom maintain close ties with the alma mater. Last year alone, researchers from UQ and institutions around the Pacific co-published around 450 articles and reviews, many in ecology and environmental studies, while more than 60 research projects were pursued. The University of Queensland has always placed importance on developing and nurturing partnerships with our Pacific neighbours. But further, just 12 months ago, UQ launched its first Global Development Impact Plan with a view to harness the breadth and depth of development expertise across the university and to help find solutions to some of the most critical development challenges faced by Indo-Pacific communities. The objectives of this plan are now firmly embedded in UQ's new strategic plan for the 2022-25, whereby we aim to be recognised as the leading Australian university for developmental impact in the Indo-Pacific region by 2032. We are committed to this goal and to building genuine partnerships that will lead to stronger research collaboration, better communication, more nuanced cultural understanding, and mutually beneficial solutions. In a world where we are experiencing significant challenges across many sectors, UQ has an important opportunity to address the most pressing challenges our nearest global neighbours face and to connect with them to deliver knowledge leadership for a better world. Global development efforts are critical to the university's broader global strategy, enabling UQ to build and sustain engagement in key countries and deliver meaningful benefits and impact to communities globally. UQ is pleased to present our third Global Development Dialogue series, and its focus is extremely relevant with the changing environment, escalating nature of climate change, and the shifting of governance across our regions front of mind for us all. Through today's dialogue, discussion, and connections, we have a real opportunity to contribute to building the foundations for a better, stronger, and more genuine partnership with our partners in the Pacific. So to our friends and colleagues across the Pacific, thank you again for your involvement in today's events and for your ongoing connection and collaboration with UQ. So now I'd like to invite His Excellency Mr. Samson Vilvil-Whare, High Commissioner of the Republic of Vanuatu to Australia, to give the welcome address. Your Excellency, thank you very kindly for offering to address us all on behalf of the Pacific Islands. And I do know that Mr. Stefan Nawandra, Director General Secretariat of the Pacific Regional Environmental Programme, would have also liked to have been here today. So over to you, Your Excellency, and thank you very much all. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Aidan Byrne. On behalf of our Pacific family, I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I'm on today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respect to their elders past and present. I also like to extend the respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that may attend this event today. From the far tip of the North Pacific in the Micronesian lands and waters to the beautiful lands and waters of the Polynesian subregion in the Eastern and Southern Pacific, and to the Melanesian lands and waters in the Western subregion of the Pacific, Ali, Galina, Yaurana, Kiora, Bulavinaka, Halolgeta. We bring special Pacific greetings to you all, and we join the University of Queensland Professor Aidan Byrne to welcome you all to this event. You've just heard me saying hello in different Pacific languages, and not all, thank goodness. It is estimated that there are over 6,000 languages spoken across the world, and 1,500 of them alone are spoken in the Pacific. This should be a clear indication that the Pacific, despite its small landmass, is highly diverse, and it has some of the oldest and richest culture, alongside the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islands tradition and culture. The Pacific is highly diverse in terms of its people, culture, and tradition. All Pacific Island countries and territories cherish their culture and take them wherever they go. As mentioned previously, the Pacific Islands have one of the oldest living culture and tradition on Earth. This means that before colonization of our region by Western powers, our Pacific Islands were run by their own governance systems based on their culture and traditions. As mentioned above, despite our small landmass, earning us the title of being the small island developing states, or SEEDs, often portrayed as islands of challenges such as remoteness, far from main markets, high food import bills, severely affected by man-made and natural disasters such as climate change, high cost of livings, etc., we as Pacific Islanders see ourselves as big ocean states, as islands of opportunities and islands that are home to us, as we have been living in this region for centuries. It is only right to say that the Pacific Islanders see themselves as natural custodians of the biggest ocean of the world, and that is the Pacific region. The Pacific Islands and Australia share a lot of common history, and they continue to cherish their good relationships over the years, despite internal and external challenges. History has shown us that both Australia and the Pacific Islands have been connected by their people even before the era of European explorers traveling across the Pacific. Our relationship is further strengthened by the Vuvale, which means family in Fijian, Vuvale partnership based on our fundamental values, which are bestowed in our people and their culture. The people-to-people connections that Professor Aidan Byrne was talking about, the people-to-people connections are more than ever strengthened through our various collaborations and partnerships, whether through universities, governments, and NGOs, etc. For example, we have seen in the past how the family spirit connection is strengthened and cherished between our people through initiatives such as the crucial supports provided by the Australian people through their government to the Pacific Islands during natural disasters. or the bushfires events, or again, the recent floodings in Australia, whereby Fiji has kindly assisted the Australian Defence Force. Moreover, we have seen during COVID-19 crisis, which led to lockdown across the world, and also in the Pacific, that the Pacific Islanders were some of the first non-Australians to be allowed to come back to Australia to work in farms. On one hand, the workers were able to make a living for their families back in the Pacific. And on the other hand, they were able to feed Australians to ensure that the food price does not go up in Australia. The Pacific Island workers have played a huge role in feeding Australians during a very critical time through their hard work in the farms across Australia. They do also help the horticultural and agricultural industry in Australia. The fact that Pacific Islanders could be given the opportunity to come to Australia during COVID-19 lockdown, when no one else was allowed to Australia, is a testimony to our true Vuvale partnership. Furthermore, these actions are also a testimony to people-to-people connection, which will need to be leveraged on specific actions to continue to flourish. It is without a doubt that we would like to see further actions taken to ensure that this people-to-people connection is leveraged. For instance, we believe that Australia could relax its travel requirements for the Pacific Islanders to its shores, such as providing visa waiver to our countries, the same manner as they provide to our New Zealand family. We believe that this will bring huge benefits to both Australia and the Pacific Islands in terms of business opportunities, tourism, and strengthen family connections. I would like to bring us back to the theme of this event. They include environment, climate change, governance, and public policy. This event will shed some light on how we can all build genuine and durable partnerships amongst the Pacific family. Furthermore, with these August panelists that are here today, we seek to further query how these genuine and durable partnerships will look like in the coming years within our family. The theme of this event, as mentioned above, are all relevant to the Pacific Islands, island countries and territories, and their relationships with Australia. As you will be part of different groups and panel later on, our August panelists will shed some light on how we can together in solidifying our existing relationships, including building new ones. Climate change is the biggest threat. It's the biggest single threat to the livelihood of the Pacific people. It is important to note that without rapid and concrete actions on climate change, there is no security in the Pacific region. Climate change has threatened the islanders' livelihood. Our food security is threatened, our socio-economic fabrics are threatened, our natural environment, such as terrestrial and biodiversity, are threatened. All in all, Pacific Island livelihoods is under the threat from the climate change. While we appreciate the recent announcement by the Australian government on the commitment to the Pacific on climate change, we hope to see more collaborative actions between our families to design and implement projects targeting climate change actions in adaptation as well as in mitigation. We, of course, welcome Australia's recent announcement on submissions on new emissions target under the UNFCCC. While designing programs, on our environment side, the Pacific Island countries and territories have some of the highest endemic rates of living species in the world. It is more important to reiterate that Pacific Islands are the custodians of the biggest and the richest oceans in the world in terms of its marine biodiversity. But we have now seen that our marine resources are highly threatened by man-made and natural disasters. For instance, overexploitation of natural resources, which is exacerbated by the natural disasters, such as the impact of climate change and extreme event weather and their frequencies. We cannot talk about environment without mentioning that some parts of our Pacific are classified as biodiversity hotspots. The experts from the Pacific Regional Environment Program of SPREP will enlighten you more on this. In the education sector, Australia has some of the top institutions leading on environment and natural resources management. We would like to see an increased collaboration between our academic institutions at regional and national level, including funding local initiatives, which are at the forefront of our community. It is more than ever important to increase collaborations in the education sector, especially at tertiary level, in training and equipping the future generation of our region and to protect their environment. We believe that more Pacific Islanders should have access to Australian education systems, and there is urgent need for more scholarships from universities across Australia for Pacific Islanders under the Vuvale partnership. And I thank the professor for mentioning the good work that the University of Queensland has done. While these efforts to bring technical qualifications to our shores are highly appreciated, we strongly think that Australia could go a step further and open up their tertiary education sector to our Pacific Islanders. Let me explain myself. Australia allows our New Zealand brothers and sisters to come and study here and pay the local tuition fee that an Australian would pay. On the contrary, any Pacific Islander with no Australian or New Zealand passport who would like to come and study in Australia must pay international fee. As a member of the Pacific family, we strongly believe that all members of the Pacific family should have the same privilege in this regard, paying the local tuition fees. We cannot rely entirely on scholarships as they become scarce year after year. Giving access to Pacific Islanders to study in Australia under the local tuition fee regime would only be a win-win for both Pacific and Australia. The benefits are endless. Should these take proceedings, Pacific Islanders will have more choices of accessing higher quality education standard, which will lead to upskilling, job opportunities, transfer of skills and technology, leapfrogging of our region in new unprecedented areas, high standard of service delivery, and harmonization of education qualifications in line with regional and national priority. Furthermore, there could be an increased flow of goods and services between Australia and the Pacific Island countries as systems will be harmonized, especially with the recent entry into force of the Pacific Agreement on Closer Economic Relations Plus, which is a free trade agreement between Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific Island countries, with the exceptions of Fiji and Papua New Guinea. Finally, in terms of the governance and public policy, Australia must be commended for providing crucial technical and financial supports to our countries. Good governance rests within having good policies. We continue to see Pacific Island countries and territories thrive for the best of their citizens. They continue to undertake crucial roles in governance and public policies that lead to better outcomes at environmental and socio-economic level. Having said that, it is crucial to continue to invest in training, in upskilling government and non-governmental organizations. Higher institutions in Australia, such as universities, have definitely a role to play in terms of research, development, and capacity building. This event has brought together a great deal of experts from across the Pacific. I am privileged to share this platform with them, and I am sure that you are also as lucky as me. Together, they will be able to provide you with first-hand information on how to strengthen genuine and durable partnerships between Australia and the Pacific in their areas of expertise. As I have always said, a long-lasting partnership is based first and foremost on mutual trust, equality, and mutual respect that constitute the family values. I thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Your Excellency, and thank you to Professor Byrne for those insightful messages on University of Queensland commitment to partnership and the ways to capitalize on opportunities to partner, as well as valuing mutually beneficial partnerships. Those two messages respectively. Thank you again, gentlemen. We'll go now into the panel discussion. We'll move on to these presentations, and the panelists will speak to one of four thematic areas, the lenses that Professor Byrne referenced earlier in the following order. The first focus 1 on development practice, focus 2, government and industry engagement, focus 3, research collaboration, and focus 4 on teaching. These short presentations will be expanded on by presenters in the breakout room discussions following these presentations. If you have questions out of these initial presentations, please share them in the chat box or the subsequent breakout room discussions. Our first two speakers will focus on development practice. They are Ms. Pelenise Alofa and Dr. Winifredi Nainotha. So I'd like to shortly very briefly introduce our first two speakers. Pelenise is the National Coordinator of the Kiribati Climate Action Network, a network of 15 NGOs active on climate change, and she's currently the country manager for Live and Learn Kiribati, which aims to educate and mobilize communities and facilitate supportive partnerships in country. Dr. Nainotha is the environmental specialist and deputy team lead for resilience and sustainable development at the United Nations Development Programme in Fiji. So we'd like to now welcome Pelenise and Dr. Nainotha to speak consecutively for the first focus lens on development practice. Thank you.
Mary, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Mary from Kiribati. My name is Pelani Zelofa, the National Coordinator for Kiribati Climate Action Network and Live and Learn. When we talk about development, my question is, what is our motivation for development? And why is it to build relationship and partnership? And how can we use development to bridge or strengthen the relationship that we have between our donors or Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific Islands? What is important this afternoon for us to understand is why do we want to support, or what's our motivation for supporting development in the islands? Why do we do it? Because if we can answer those questions, then we know that we are there for the right purpose, and we are there because it's for the people that we're trying to build relationship with. Is it out of compassion? Is it for justice? Is it out of guilt? We want to do something good. Is it for bringing change and making a difference? Maybe there is a gap to build partnership. What are our motivations for development? My work as a community mobilizer, and I work with communities as an NGO, I know that the head of Kiribati is my government. And it has two arms. One arm is an NGO or civil society. The other arm is a private sector. And all the three are working together for communities, people. So our development partners come in, they want to try to build relationship with us. For who? What are they there for? To build relationship with my government, build relationship with an NGO, a private sector, or the people of Kiribati, or the people in the Pacific. My government and its arms, the NGO and the private sector, are really, we are servants. We are servants for the people of the Pacific Islands. And building a partnership with Australia, New Zealand, or donors is really helping us to serve the people that are there. Because the center of our development is the people. So really, when we say the center of our development is the people, we're trying to build relationship and partnership with the people. It's not about an NGO, it's not about the government, it's not about the private sector, but the people of the Pacific Islands. How can we reach them through the tools that we have and the partners that we have? So the topic this afternoon is strengthening partnership. For what? What's our motivation? If it's for the people in the Pacific, then we need to build that partnership. And how do we do it? That's a question that comes in. A good example is right now that we're working with is someone from the Australian ICOM. And he actually reached out to us to do for the work that we're doing. He wants to know what we're doing. He said, it's not me making decisions, it's you people telling us what the people need. I have to do my part as a community mobilizer to make sure I know my community so I can build that relationship with my donor or with my partner like Australia, New Zealand. I have to do my part. So I did the restructuring of community people on South Tarawa. I know who they are, where they live, what they do, what their needs are. Because I have to do it. I prioritize that. I make it, the first thing is to restructure and make sure that I know where these people are. And I did that restructuring as a team. Our team did it. And we came up with more than 500 communities on South Tarawa. And with these 500 communities, we know where they are right now, and we can identify what their needs are. I work with my government, and I said, these are my communities. What can we do together? Between me and our partners, we do not have the answer. I cannot just come up with an answer like, this is a priority for my people. No, we have to do our assessments. And so what is important for our building relationship is we know who we are, we know where the people are, we know where the needs are, and we communicate it to the people that we're going to be working with. And the people that we work with, for example, if it's Australia, New Zealand, they need to learn to trust. They need to respect the people that they are working with. They need to trust what they're doing. And you cannot know what I'm doing when you are based in Canberra or you're based in Wellington and making decisions for me as a community mobilizer and helping the people with the needs that they have. No, you cannot. You will depend on the papers that I will send you. The best thing for you to build the relationship is to come out here and work with us and see what is happening on the ground. We call it understand the local context, my culture, my aspirations. When you understand that, then you will know what I really need, what my community is wanting and needing at this time. So I know that we really need to respect local context, learn to trust the people we work with, have empathy, feel the pain of the struggles that the people have. And when we work, we integrate our work. When I'm talking about water, it's not just water. I'm talking about everything else that will affect the people dealing with water. And the other thing is we really need to learn to be flexible. Flexibility is important for us to build that relationship. And we have to learn to share our knowledge, transfer our skills to the people that are working on the ground, and work and understand the people that you're working with, learn the lessons that you have with them. And so I really feel building partnership, we need to have that. We need to have respect. We need to trust the people we are working with. We really need to learn the local context and integrate our implementation work that we have and be flexible. And so, do I still have more time?
Sorry, Pelnisa, I think you're running out of time. If you could begin to wrap up. Thank you.
Okay, I can continue to be sharing this in our, when we go out to breakout rooms. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pelnisa. A reminder again to all of our speakers this afternoon that you'll have time in your breakout groups to continue these discussions. So thank you again, Pelnisa. I would like to hand over now to Dr. Nanoda. Thank you, Dr. Minnie.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Penny. And thank you, Ms. Salofa, for that. We are talking about strengthening partnerships, you know, and the question that Ms. Salofa raised is, how do we do it? From experiences, I will just be sharing on what we do here at UNDP, and from previous experience based on my work, my research work for my master's at the University of Wollongong, and of course, a PhD from Massey in New Zealand. I'm so happy I studied at these two places because they are so close to home and they understand the Pacific way. So when we try to strengthen partnerships, you know, it's from community to cabinet. And I want to concentrate a little bit on the community, because what used to happen before, it's like somebody coming to your home and telling you what to do in your home, in your own surroundings, because it was already mentioned by the two speakers, Mr. Byrne, Professor Byrne, and His Excellency from Vanuatu, that, you know, when we move into a place, the context that is there. So I want us to remember an acronym, CROP, CROP, contextual. It has to, whatever solutions you're bringing in, for it to work, it has to integrate with solutions already in, with systems already in place. And in place at the community level is already governance systems. It could be traditional systems. In place at community level is already knowledge. It's not the Western knowledge that we learn in the chemistry lab, but it is traditional knowledge that has been refined over generation. When I talk about knowledge, it's just not only knowledge up here, it's values. This is the Friedrich-Burke's description of traditional ecological knowledge. Friedrich-Burke says it's values, it's your beliefs, it's how you behave. I will expand on this as we go into the breakout rooms. And of course, you have to respect the culture of the place and use indigenous methodologies. I love Talanoa. You know, you cannot go into the community and fill questionnaires. No, it won't work. You have to use the Talanoa and enrich by social capital. This rich social capital still within our communities. Social capital, of course, is trust, reciprocation, or the networks in place. And the second one of R, it has to be relevant. You know, the work that UNDP does in Vanuatu is very different from the work done in the low-lying atoll islands of the most vulnerable in the Pacific, RMI, Tuvalu, and Kiribati, low-lying atolls, and their solutions to rising sea levels and climate change is very different from Vanuatu and Fiji, for instance, very big volcanic islands. The other thing is we go into the communities and we look at projects that have, well, my grandchildren say died, projects that have died. So we see remnants of this in the village. Now, why did it die? Because funding is finished. When funding is finished, it dies. Why? Because it was not owned by the community. The community's priorities, how they want to do things. You have to integrate whatever you're bringing into the knowledge systems and into the way of life down at the community level. Even when it comes to monitoring for your indicators, setting the indicators to them. My cousin in the village, fisherman, doesn't know about SDGs, never heard of it. His priority is to put the food on the table. As a development partner, I have to marry his priority with the priority of the UN's SDGs, and of course the funders, the different types of donors. I also look after the GF and the GCF funding in this office. And we have to look at the priorities of these funders, which are thankfully funded by Australia and New Zealand. And of course, we have to also look at priorities of the government of the day. And the most important thing, P, partnership. You know, so we are somewhere in the middle there, the development partners. On one hand, we have the donors. So we have to marry their priorities and how they want to do things on the ground according to their funding with the priorities on the ground of the people, of the government, from community to cabinet. And UNDP, for instance, cannot do this by itself. It needs live and learn. It needs SPREP, SPC, international organizations, WWF, CSOs, and the donors, of course. And of course, academia, very important bit. this acknowledgement. It has to be, knowledge management has to be preserved and passed on to the next generation. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Winnie, and thank you to Pelenisa for those two quite enlightening presentations. Before we head on into the next focus area on government and industry engagement, I think there are some really crucial lessons out of this around purposeful cross-sectoral partnerships and contextualized approaches that align with existing systems. We'll move on to the next presentation now on focus area 2, government and industry engagement. We'll be hearing again from His Excellency, the High Commissioner to Australia from Vanuatu, Samson Vilmufari. Over to you, Your Excellency.
Thank you again. Thank you, host, for letting me speaking again on this issue on governance and public policy. I think the colleagues, the sisters from the Pacific have said it all. They have said it all in terms of during their interventions. And I think governance and public policy, and as I mentioned in my speech, they go hand in hand. And having those structures in place, and as I previously mentioned, that a lot of our Pacific Island countries have come far in terms of having proper governance, but also in a Western way, I should say, but also public policies in place. We've always said in Vanuatu that we have 3 pillars of our society back home. These 3 pillars, when you look at them, any projects, any development projects that you bring on board has to somehow conciliate, making sure that the 3 pillars are also there so that the project can be successful. The first one of these pillars is our culture and tradition. And I think it would be similar to the rest of the Pacific, that culture and tradition, and again, as I keep saying over and over again, we are the indigenous people of this region. And that's why we already have a culture and traditions in place. And we already have governance systems. Our colleague from UNDP has talked about, traditional governance systems, knowledge, community knowledge. We are not aware of, I would say, SDGs and all of that, but it is our role to make sure that we match what I would say the Western way of seeing how we progress in the sustainable development goals to our local level, bring it down to the local level. And I thank UNDP for and other partners in the region that work tirelessly on that. I've mentioned around in terms of the support that the Australian government has provided in ensuring that we have proper governance system, Western governance systems in place, public policies. Australia has invested heavily in our judiciary systems across the Pacific, but has also invested heavily in our regulatory framework as well, regulatory institutions in the region as well. So at the same time, when you look into this, you would say these are all elements that have been imported. And this is part of our second pillar in the region, in the Pacific, but also in Vanuatu. Our second pillar would be the governance system, though what we call mostly across the Pacific, the Westminster system, but we do also have the French governance system as well in place. And those are imported. This is an important pillar into our society in the region. So I mentioned previously culture and tradition. Second one is the governance. And this is the governance system, the Western governance system that we need to understand. We need to make sure, because we're part of the international community. And so being part of that international community means that we need to also respond to some criteria in our own ways back in the region in trying to connect that traditional way and the traditions to the governance, which is the Westminster, or it could be a different systems of governance, Western system of governance in the region. The last pillar of our society in the region is religion. Now, you go to many different countries in the region. I know for a fact for Vanuatu, it's predominantly Christian. And so this is also something that has played a huge role in our society in the region, the religion. And so sometimes our traditional values do not match with our religious values. So how do we do that as a practitioner? How do we make sure that, for example, in the judiciary systems, we do have, some traditional judiciary systems as well in place? I don't like to call it traditional, but I'd like to call it, our local judiciary systems back in the days. And so how do you match that with the Westminster system for our countries that are using common law today in the region? How do you match that actually? How do you make sure that you pick some good elements from our local governance systems, but also judiciary systems, sorry, and then incorporate it into the common law system in the region that a lot of our judiciary systems in the region are using. So again, while we're very happy to have a lot of these supports from Australia and New Zealand, but also other donors in terms of supporting our governance and our public policy sector side of things. Sometimes I think we also need to see, because sometimes there is a mismatch. And also sometimes we also notice that a lot of these systems, when they come in place, our people do not know how to use those systems. We've always said back home that, you know, when Britain and France left the country, you know, they leave a system, they leave a machine without a user manual. We don't know how to use this. And so again, capacity buildings come in there as well. While it's okay to promote good governance, public policy in a Western way, let's not forget that we need capacity buildings in policy arena, in the governance system as well, to make sure that they work hand in hand. And at the same time, what I really like from our two sisters previously around, you know, the strengthening of partnerships in the community level. Community is important. I cannot be sitting in Canberra or I cannot be sitting in Paris actually and telling you what to do. Community voice is so important in the governance and public policy arena as well. So we need to listen to the community as well. We need to have deep listening. And so good partnership comes with deep listening of our people as well. And that I will stop here, but I will provide more information during our breakaway groups. Thank you.
Thank you again. You actually some really important points there around building partnerships sort of based on the pillars of culture, governance, and religion, and aligning with traditional governance systems, working in cultural ways. Again, for those who are keen to engage further with this subject, His Excellency will be in focus group 2 in the breakout rooms on government and industry engagement. We'll move on to focus area 3 now on research collaboration. Our two speakers are Easter Chushing, the Deputy Director General of SPREP, and Espen Ronenberg from the Secretariat of the Pacific Community. I'd like to now invite Easter and then Espen to speak in turn. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Benny. Taravalava, greetings, Excellencies, speakers, organizers, and participants. Now, I want to speak about SPREP and its work, and really to provide context to the discussion that will follow later. So SPREP is the region's key intergovernmental organization for environment and sustainable development, and it's one of the several intergovernmental agencies comprising the Council of Regional Organizations in the Pacific, or CROP. This is a different acronym to what Dr. Winnie referred to earlier. And so under the agreement establishing SPREP, the purposes of SPREP are to promote cooperation in the Pacific region and to provide assistance in order to protect and improve the environment and to ensure sustainable development for present and future generations. And our vision is the Pacific environment sustaining our livelihoods and natural heritage in harmony with our cultures. Now, SPREP is a partnership of 26 member countries, which is made up of 21 Pacific Island countries and territories and 5 metropolitan countries, including Australia. And SPREP Strategic Plan 2017-2026 prioritizes 4 key priority areas on climate change resilience, island and ocean ecosystems, waste management and pollution control, and environmental monitoring and governance. And oceans is a cross-cutting theme with climate change as the principal concern of SPREP. Now, SPREP provides assistance to 21 of the Pacific Island countries and territories that I mentioned through technical advice and support for capacity building on the region's environment and development priorities. And it also promotes, and I mentioned, sustainable development and cooperation in the region, and of course, working closely with sister agencies, the CROP agencies, to serve the people and governments of the region. I also like to mention that SPREP also works closely with key partners in addressing environmental priorities of the region, And these partners include NGOs, UN agencies, universities, including Australian universities, and scientific and technical institutions. Now, this opportunity through today's dialogue, we look at this as an opportunity to welcome new partnerships that we can forge as an outcome of this dialogue today through research collaboration and really building on our past and existing work, as well as in new areas where little work has been done, but where there is a need for it. Now, such partnership would need to be meaningful, build on and add value to what already exists in the region in terms of the work of regional organizations such as SPRED, and should also be based on the principles of respect, mutual trust, and that it is resilient and sustainable. I want to share with you our experience in the last 2 years where we faced quite many challenges with COVID-19 and impact on the work that we delivered and the services that we delivered to our member countries when border closed across the region. This resulted in us and SPRED changing the way we provided our services to our member countries. And so we sort of looked at our engaging more local institutions and experts to assist in implementing part of the work for us. However, this also came with its own challenges, where we found ourselves competing with other organizations for the limited pool of experts in country. And so, really, I think this is an area where I think there is potential in strengthening the partnerships with Australia, universities and other technical institutions, and looking at providing more opportunities for specialized training for those in the region, so we could have a wider pool of technical experts to assist in implementing environmental priorities in the region and in country, and working closely with organizations such as SPRED. I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much, colleagues. Whaftai te lava.
Easter, thanks for that presentation. I really like the point you said about capacity building as well, so building that into partnerships. So thank you for that, Easter. Would like to now hand over to Espen. Thank you, Espen.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, Yokwe Alop. I may not look it, but I'm an adopted Marshall Islander, so I will greet you in Marshallese. Yokwe Alop, everybody. I'm not going to speak too much about SPC's capacities, but I'm sure it's well known throughout the region. But I just want to get straight into the issue. And I think the key issue around research needs in the Pacific just hinges on the sheer capacity constraints of the region. For example, we know that for our countries, when they are seeking climate change financing, there's a great need for data and information to underpin the climate change rationales for projects. Now, this is actually a necessity, as we do need to have the right specification, for example, for any renewable energy projects, just as we need information for ensuring that any climate change adaptation projects can really address the problems and impacts that they seek to counter. Now, in the past, we had a regional technical support mechanism, which was funded through the ADB, and it established a regional roster of experts and a rapid response fund. So countries could request technical assistance from regional agencies, and the technical assistance would be deployed within 3 months. But this provided much needed technical expertise for project development or project related support. But there was this central condition that the technical assistance that was sent had to be shadowed by at least 2 local experts to mentor these. And I know that this concept is currently being reviewed by SPRED for revamping and rebranding, but it's a sort of initiative that really would fit this whole idea of research and collaboration across the region. We need to have technical expertise provided to the Pacific Small Island states to enable them to develop proposals for larger funding or assistance with aspects of project implementation. Another area where I see a big gap is when it comes to technologies that are specific to small island states. There are these global technology repositories, but there are none that are specific to small island states. Often the technologies are not suited to the scale of the islands, either for renewable energy, but particularly for adaptation. So knowledge products around these would also be very helpful. It's another area of cooperation where I see a great deal of need in the region. We also need to look at climate change projects in the region that have multiple benefits. So ecosystem-based adaptation, for example, often has mitigation benefits, for example, mangrove restoration and so on. But these are challenging for resourcing as they're often very small scale in the Pacific Islands, or they fall between the sort of funding opportunities that are out there. They're either too big for the sort of small grants programs, or they're too small for the larger funding sources. So some cooperation and collaboration around bundling of projects across the region could be useful. Now, on research and systematic observation, this has been a bugbear of mine for a number of years now. This is an area where it's very challenging to attract resources. So we had when I was working at SPREP, we had a pilot project on ocean acidification, and it doubled the number of observing systems in the Pacific from 3 to 6. So this is clearly inadequate given the size of the region, but it's really challenging to find resources for installation, training in their use, and maintenance. I think this was picked up by previous speakers. So clearly, further academic cooperation would be very much welcome, in that we need to build on the limited resources that we have, bolster them with academic and technical support from institutions that are willing to help, and working together, SBC, SPREP, USP, PIFs, and the UN agencies in the region. We need to work together in order to advance this agenda, which is to provide a secure future for Pacific populations. Thank you.
Thank you, Espen, and thank you also to Isa for both of your contributions. We'll move on now to focus area 4 on teaching. And for this thematic area, for this lens, we'll be hearing from Ms. Bertha Tongahai. Ms. Bertha Tongahai is the Director of Education with the newer government. We now welcome Ms. Tongahai to share. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Kalawhalaiatu, Kemutolosi, and it's a great privilege to participate in this afternoon's Global Development Dialogue. In fact, today's dialogue is a vital characteristic of Pacific Islands, where people get together and discuss views and perspectives, principle of working together, trusting each other in a genuine participation and taking ownership. As you all know, knowing and using cultural principles and practical solutions to survive COVID-19 is a classic example of Pacific resilience. But my talk this afternoon will focus on NIU and Australia's partnership. That the partnership was taken to a new level in 2020 when Australia opened the office of the Australian High Commission here in Alofi. So that's excellent for our local people. And there's quite a lot of work being done. If you would like to read more about activities, go onto Facebook and read about it on the Australian High Commission /New Wing. In addition, we are also grateful to the Australian government for providing Australian award-specific scholarships for our students. Some of them are studying at the University of the South Pacific at the moment. I'll also be talking about the Australian Pacific partnership and that exists through funding and technical support through strengthening these partnerships. As you all aware, the BREAKOUT or the Pacific Regional Education Framework was endorsed by the Forum Education Ministers in 2018. BREAKOUT is a ministerial policy document that guides the development of regional education interventions to support national education systems of Pacific countries achieve their national, global, and education goals and commitments. Activities are rolled out over 3 phases over a 12-year period, and different countries have different activities. In addition, there's also the PESA Plus qualifications regional and labor mobility project that's happening this year over a 5-year period. So anyway, it's also part of that development. So we'll further elaborate on these topics at the breakout room, and I'd like to thank everyone for listening. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Tongahai. We'll go now into the breakout rooms. So as we normally do with breakout room allocations, those allocations are being made now. I think people have already also made some contributions to those groups. So those there are 4 breakout rooms for breakout room discussions. The first is on development practice with Pelinise and Dr. Winnie. The second on government and industry engagement with His Excellency Samson Vilfare. The third on research collaboration with Eastern Espen, and the final one on teaching with Ms. Tongahai of the Niue government. So you've got those instructions on your screen now. You'll be prompted to join your breakout room so you hover your cursor over the prompt and click yes. And then we welcome you to begin participating in those discussions immediately, and those will feed back into the plenary panel discussion following those breakout rooms. There've been, I think, a number of really useful discussions so far, so we welcome you to share your questions and some suggestions and ideas for how this work can be progressed in your breakout room sessions. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our breakout room on development practice. I'm hoping we're all here now. I might leave it another minute or so, but I'm hoping we have Dr. Winnie, who is and Pelinise, you are our main players. So if we've got you two, that's a good thing. I might introduce myself. My name is Dr. Peter Walters. I'm a sociologist from the School of Social Science here at the University of Queensland. I'm sitting in a room on our St. Lucia campus with my colleague here, Ben Breen from Global Engagement. And it's our job today just to facilitate and enable you all, hopefully, well, a lot of you anyway, to ask some questions, and particularly of our two main speakers, who I think both in their own way gave us a really strong outline of some of the principles that we should be thinking about when we're thinking about development practice in the Pacific. Just by way of context, I've been working in the Solomon Islands with a colleague of mine now for about 8 years, helping some Australian scientists with the introduction of smallholder teak plantations in remote villages. And I must say, with all honesty, that I've learnt the hard way some of the lessons that Dr. Winnie and Penelise sort of outlined in their brief presentations before. I'll just quickly hand over to my colleague, Ben, who can introduce himself and maybe.
Sure. Thank you, Peter, who is just to my left in the room, but also on the screen. Hopefully everyone can hear me. If you can't, just let me know and I'll do something to correct that. Thanks. Lovely to see everyone here today. It's exciting to have this conversation. The Pacific is a region I'm quite passionate about. It's a region I've lived in personally for about 7 years in the Solomon Islands, but I've also spent time in PNG and Vanuatu and Nauru, and doing a lot of grassroots community development work in those places as well. So it's great to be involved in this conversation. At a practical level, I've sent a link for the Padlet, which is kind of going to be our online virtual whiteboard for the session. It's in the chat. I've sent it hopefully to this room and everyone's received it. So if you don't have that, maybe just send me a message or put it in the chat that you're having some trouble, but we're going to use that to collaborate. In terms of the overall rules, I mean, I don't think we have too much in terms of like do's or don'ts, but perhaps just general courtesy of like, let everyone speak. And if you have a point, maybe you can use the reactions down the bottom to raise your hand, and then Peter will sort of hopefully, let everyone have a turn to get the points across. Mindful that we probably don't have as much time as we would love to really get into this. So I'll hand back to Peter.
Thank you, Ben. From the guest list today, it looks like we have representatives as students, as academics, but also as practitioners, which is fantastic. And so do we have any questions yet to start off with, Ben? Or maybe I could ask one of my own to get the ball rolling.
Sorry, I was just trying to sort out the link. I think there's that might go to the whole group, and so hopefully we'll see how that goes. Hey, do you able to share the Padlet as the screen, and then we can start going from there, I think.
Oh, okay, I should do that.
Yeah. But in the meantime, maybe Winnie and Miss Alofa, if you wanted to maybe if there were some points that you were discussing previously that you may want to pick up on to maybe spark this conversation while we're just getting the things up and running, feel free to jump in.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Telenisa here from Kiribati. And just something on with my community in Fiji. I'm actually from Rambi in the island in Fiji, and my mom is from Banaba here. So I'm living in Kiribati right now. But we were working on something, and it's something that is quite new, but it's something that we've been thinking about over the last few years. We've been working with communities and with our partners and our donors. Example, our partner we work with our partner and we develop a project, a $9 or $10 million project for 4 countries. To do development work in say 4 countries in the Pacific. When that is done, it's over. Then we have to work for another project proposal to get some more funds the next time. And I'm conscious that the fact is the funding we know come from Australia or New Zealand, our donors. It comes from the taxpayers. So I came up with something like this. If there's a $9 million or $10 million given as a project, why can't we invest this? This is radical. Why can't we invest this for our communities? And every year we get say that 10% interest and work with our communities. And it's like when we give it to our communities, we give it as not a loan, but a revolving fund for them, and it just continues. $10 million will go for another 30 years or maybe forever. It's all there for maybe for the youth and for communities. Instead of $10 million for 5 years is done, then we write another project proposal. Why can't the taxpayers in Australia and New Zealand who want to really help and build partnership with communities, give it to them and trust them to have a trust fund so that they can revolve that money and it goes on maybe forever, instead of 5 years, instead of 2 years. Something, something to think about. We've been thinking about it and said, why is it that we are always asking for funds? 10 years, 10 million finish. But where are the 10 million? It comes to the Pacific Islands, but what is happening? Are we out of poverty now? No. All our problems have gone.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Does anyone have
like
have a response to Palente about that particular proposal, which would take a lot of I guess development practitioners out of the picture, which may or may not be a good thing.
Yeah, anybody want to comment on that? It's really helpful for us. But we continue to build partnership because you are there to virtual training, capacity building.
Okay, where's that?
All that continues.
Maretta. I think, Maretta, you had your hand up, is that right?
Hey, Bula, everyone. Maori Pelanise, how are you? Always talking sense as always. Maori. Well, I think you probably just answered the question. Is that, yeah, obviously that's very sensible and has been shown to work with the tuna fisheries trust funds in both Tuvalu and Kiribati to a certain extent. But the Australian government doesn't, and other governments, sadly, do not just give development assistance for development, which is the fundamental problem. Development assistance is hugely political. So unless they can have their ribbon cutting opportunities and their flag waving opportunities, and their, dare I say, academic institutions, heavily involved in the research side, I imagine that that's where the main stumbling block and barrier would come to the political will for doing it. And I think it requires a lot more people, like all of the people that are on this call today, to be advocating more strongly for everything that you're already advocating for locally led development, for local approaches that that do trust and invest for the long term. I mean, we both work on climate change, and it's infuriating, particularly in the climate change space, that we go from project to project to project when we know that it's such a long-term issue, and that the best way to deal with those long-term issues is to have trust funds and funds that allow us to plan for the long term at the pace in which communities want to plan, and not at the pace in which donors want to shove money out the door. So yeah, if they want to shove money out the door, put them in a trust fund and we'll use them at the pace we can use them. So yeah, thanks Pelanise for raising the point.
Thank you, Marita. Yeah.
Thank you, Marita.
My next question is, Peter, if my next question is, if there is a trust fund like that, how do we continue to build relationship with our partners? Because we still need them there. It's not that because they give the money and we don't need them anymore. We continue to need them to be there. So what we have to develop policies so that we can continue working with them.
So does someone have any ideas on what a new, I guess, modified role might be for development practitioners, given all of the principles that we heard expressed so well by the two speakers? Okay. Dr. Winnie, I might bring you in here if that's okay. And I have pulled up your crab, and perhaps we could use that as a bit of a prompt for us to think maybe further about different and maybe better models of development practice. We might have lost Winnie. That's okay. Let's keep going. That is Winnie's crab. If anyone would like to take a screenshot of it, I think she actually covered quite a bit of that ground during her presentation earlier. Listening to both Winnie and Palenci, I was really interested. I was thinking, as a practitioner, about what, in the view of Pacific Islanders, and we have quite a few Pacific Islanders here in our group. What does a good development project look like? Does anyone have any examples that sort of come to mind about development that has worked well, and what sort of realms is that development in? What should we be focusing on, perhaps which we're not focusing on at the moment as development practitioners?
You want us to give an example?
Sure.
Peter?
Yeah.
One good example was during the COVID, we had a project on COVID. COVID and WASH. There's another project on COVID and food security or home gardening. We're supposed to teach the whole island. We're supposed to teach communities how to plant or help them to have household gardens. But we changed the implementation plan to build a nursery on this island in North Tarawa. We built it complete with irrigation, with a greenhouse, compost housing, and well fenced. All the money went into that, into building that. And then we conducted a training on food security, on home gardening, and we asked the agriculture assistant, now that you have all this, please go out and train the communities, visit them, take whatever you have from your nursery and visit them. Now you can reach everybody because you have a nursery. Actually, that was the first nursery we have, I think, in Kiribati. But the good thing about this project was the flexibility. We asked the donors, we need to change this because the time is so short for us to reach all communities because of the lockdown. We need to target the agriculture assistant here to own it, to work on it, and to take our voices to the communities and collect data from them. It became a model right now in the country. They want to build nurseries on all islands. You cannot teach home gardening, you cannot teach agriculture if you do not have a nursery. You do not have seedlings, you do not have seeds, you do not have planting materials. So, but why did we change it? Timing, and the other one was we asked the agriculture assistant, what is the real need in your island, on your island? He told us, this, we really need the nursery. So we change it. And today, right now, it's, the island is prospering. They are actually selling crops. He's selling his seedlings, and at the same time, people are harvesting and giving it to him to sell. And I just took our donor across last week to visit.
Oh. We seem to have lost Palenci for a moment. While we're waiting to get her back, I can see that Dr. Winnie has returned. Hello. Who was that?
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. I can see my crab
You can see
on
your,
the
yes,
screen.
we wanted to ask you about
this-
your crab, but you disappeared for a while.
Sorry, my laptop died.
Okay.
Okay, this
Technical issue.
I'm encouraging in the Pacific, especially, you know, in academia where you usually have a theoretical framework. I think that actually comes in chapter 2 of any postgraduate studies. Instead of having boxes and arrows that easily makes our eyes go cross, I use this as the interconnectedness, you know, the crab metaphor. And incidentally, this crab, the metaphor, the saying of this crab actually is done in my dialect, fortunately, which says, you know, how you walk, mother, which is sideways, I will also walk sideways. I was talking a little bit about knowledge management, you know, and how you pass the next generation is watching you, what you teach, what you say, and the university can play that important role of formally teaching, passing on knowledge. I'm just not talking about Western science. If there is a way in which you could help transfer knowledge, permissible indigenous knowledge from one generation to the next, if the universities can facilitate that. And instead of those arrows and boxes, I use this crab. On one side, there's traditional ecological knowledge. Now, when we talk about knowledge, it's not just knowing how to do things in your head, it's actually the skills and in the Fijian way, the mana, you know, the manner that comes with it, the mana that comes with it. So there, in our Fijian villages, there are fishermen, there are warriors, and the warriors now, of course, don't go to war anymore. They own the biggest pieces of land. Theoretically, they should, because they used to plant when there was no wars going on. And we have the priests. So that's how we were actually structured according to our families for knowledge and for standings in the village structure. So when you go in to do marine protected areas work, it's important to listen to the people about places of cultural significance, of places of ecological significance where they know the fish would go to spawn. And these are the places where you use for conservation. And also, it's interesting, thank you, Marita, for being here. Look at Marita using that term, the Pacific term, Talanoa. And that's how you do your consulting, that you consult with all these different groups. It's just not on in the village for you to come with your questionnaires. You know, I read the book while studying and it says, we lie, you lie. In that, what we feed into what we write is what we hear from the people. If they lie, then we lie. What we write down is going to be lies. So if you are not an insider researcher, so I'm targeting this for those of you, it's never too late to do your master's or do your PhD or even start on a first degree. You only stop learning when you die. So that'll be at 80 years old. And this is something that any indigenous people in the world should be allowed by the university, you know, to engage in their own methodology. Because usually when you do research, you are required to push out so many, such a certain number of questionnaires. We don't do questionnaires in the Pacific, we do Talanoa. And there's no shame in using indigenous words, you know, because the heaviness, the brevity of indigenous words are usually lost in translation. Thank you. So this is the crab where my topic was looking at the traditional ecological knowledge and the social capital and how it affects the community-based conservation. You see the two eyes of a crab. That is how any individual, well, most of the individuals in Fiji, natives at least, look at the world. If something happens to you, you look from the cultural lens. You say, maybe I wronged my grandfather in the village, or from the church lens, from the religious lens, where you say, oh, maybe I did something, I sinned against God. But you don't really think that you ate something that didn't go well with your digestive juices. So that is what that crab was all about. Thank you.
Thank you, Winnie. Does anyone have anything to, any questions of Winnie about the crab or further comments? I guess I had a question, Winnie, and I know from my own experience in the Pacific that, people, as you say, ecological knowledge is incredibly sophisticated, but often there are two worlds, I guess, or two forms or different ways of articulating ecological knowledge, the sort of Western scientific way, but also the traditional way that people in the Pacific understand ecology. Is there a better framework for getting those two systems to talk to each other a little better?
Maybe because there's such a wide variety of it's almost like an autism setup, you go 1 to 10, then you go up and down the range. That's why they call it a spectrum. There's such a wide spectrum. So you're probably targeting activities. Even when it comes to when you move out and you want the community to do monitoring and evaluation, you have to translate. You have to translate your SDG indicators or your donor indicators into indicators that can be measurable by the communities, and that is useful, that is meaningful for them. So long after the funding is gone, they're still monitoring because their target is to putting the food on the table. So there is no, we cannot come up with a book that's going to capture all to marry these two types of knowledge systems.
Yeah. We only have about 5 minutes left. I'll just, I think we're going to get kicked out of our breakout room. So if you have any ideas or questions or thoughts that you haven't had a chance to ask, or you didn't want to ask in this forum, please go to the Padlet page there and put them down, because we can use them later in the wider forum that we're going to have once the breakout room's finished. But we still have a few minutes. So if anyone has any questions or comments, let's have them.
A book I've added into the comments section. It's called Indigenomics, and it's actually got quite a really good graph. I don't know if you can, you can't see it in, but it sort of showcases the difference between Indigenous worldview and Western mainstream worldview, and it's actually quite quite a good book as well. So that one I just put in the comments, but as per Ben's comment, I'll add it in the Padlet. Thanks.
Is that your book, Anthea?
Oh no, I didn't write it. It's First Nations from Canada. My husband's Aboriginal, my children are Aboriginal, so I can sort of in terms of like really care about the Indigenous, like elevating that sophisticated Indigenous knowledge system. So do a lot of reading about Indigenous knowledge across the globe.
Yep.
And just ordered this one, so it's quite interesting. It's not showing up on the.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, there's an increasing literature, I think, and an increasing involvement, particularly in the academic world, by Indigenous and First Nation authors and academics. But I think we need to do a lot more. And as the High Commissioner lobbied very well, I think, for much more opportunity for Pacific Islanders to come to places like the University of Queensland and study for higher degrees. I think that would help that along very well. We have a couple more minutes if anyone has a question or a comment. Oh, Marita, your hand's up again.
Well, I was trying to wait and pause in case anybody else wanted to say anything. I think, you know, one of the things, I've lived and worked in Fiji for 16 years. So I'm obviously not originally from the Pacific, but I've been here a while working for SPC GIZ, and over the last 6 years, a social enterprise on the tourism side. And thankfully, given the last few years, also a small consulting business. One of the big issues in making headway on some of this is the procurement rules around development practice. So time and time again, we see you know, more weight and more criteria being given to academic qualifications compared to lived experience within the Pacific by Pacific Islanders. So we get incredibly frustrated because all the rest of our team are all from the Pacific, you know, having to put in for things where Pacific Island experience is classed as desirable, but, you know, a master's in something is classed as essential. And for everybody kind of, I think, that's spoken already, we know how important relationships, trust building, knowledge of place and context, knowledge of culture, all of the issues that Winnie and Pelenice have already spoken about are for effective development practice. And COVID has reinforced that. And it's been actually really nice over the last few years to have things a lot more locally led and focused. So I think that whole disconnect between what some of the conversations and the push at the political will and the research level around locally led development versus the way the systems currently function is really important, also as a kind of a research topic and as a kind of area to try and chip away at reforming. Because until that's reformed, until we have, you know, the actual time to do MEL, incorporating Pacific approaches, rather than being forced to do it in, you know, 3 months because the donor needs it for accountability purposes, the harder it is to do some of this in practice.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. I think we haven't really spoken about the elephant in the room, which is that most international and national donor organisations have more than just benevolence behind their aid programs, and that's often, I think, one of the obstacles that we run into. We're about to leave. Okay, so we're about to get kicked out, I think. So please keep adding to the board. It'll still be up there. Thank you all very much for joining us today. Was a bit rushed, never mind. But thank you in particular to our two speakers, Pelenice and Winnie. And we'll see you all back again in the big group. Okay, bye now. Thank you.
The number seems to have stabilized for the moment. So I'll say good day and kick off with everyone. And I'm sure the others might be joining us along the way. But firstly, I guess, thank you all very, very much for joining us for this conversation. It's clearly an extremely important one. And it's wonderful to see this group of people and have this opportunity that we can come together and talk about how we can strengthen partnerships with the Pacific, especially through engagement with industry and government, and of course, the academic sector as well. So thank you all. It's brilliant that you can join us, and thank you very much, Your Excellency, for your beautiful and very important introduction earlier. There's clearly some really important issues that we'll be able to follow up with and continue on with today. Thoa will shortly be sharing the link to a very simple and quite accessible board where we can capture our notes together. And we'll share that in a minute and just talk people through it briefly. I guess the key thing to keep in mind is we only have about 30 minutes, and it's really important that we get the opportunity to hear from everyone in the room. And to do that, we've got to make the best use of our time and make sure we share the mic. So I'll be doing as little talking as possible, and I'll really hope that everyone in the room can please make sure your voices are heard, and we'll make sure we make space for that. So different ways so that we can also, be capturing ideas and as effectively as possible. Thoa will share the link to this board. It's really quite easy. It's probably very difficult for anyone on mobile, but for anyone on a laptop, you just click the link, move into the board. And in fact, I'll share my screen just for the moment so you can see what to expect. This is the board. And there's different categories with questions. So all of these relate to industry and government engagement. And there's different kind of prompting questions. So the first is just about, please make an introduction so we know who we are. If there's any sort of really big picture ideas that don't fit anywhere else, there's a column called Think Tank. You can add them there. And all you have to do to add a comment is click on the plus button, and then you can begin. Please begin with your name. And I'll do it right now just so you can see what I'm talking about. And then hit the button publish. And as soon as you do that, you can see it appear on the page for everyone else to see as well. Rather than reiterating comments, if you want to build on someone else's comment, please, you can respond very easily by just clicking the bottom there as well. So we can make this a nice flowing conversation. There's a few different issues. So other than the first is around making an introduction to yourself. The second column is around any sort of really big picture ideas. The third is about what needs to be considered to achieve this particular outcome of better engagement through government and industry. In particular, we might have a place to comment on different barriers that exist. But hopefully we can focus our time and attention on the opportunities and the solutions to those barriers so that we can really build on this proactively as well. So this column here relates to who needs to be involved to achieve this outcome of greater engagement in the Pacific, how we can make this happen, what are the practical steps that we can take, and if there's any key questions that come up that we might not be able to fully delve into in the limited time we have, please put them here and others can respond and we can make sure that they're still on the agenda. They're still very important. And finally, any additional comments. So the very first thing we'll do is Thoa will share that link. We'll be able to, everyone will have access to that link. And please don't hesitate to comment on the area that you feel most strongly about or where you've got the most experience, and add your thoughts that way. Just at that very beginning, we'll hand the microphone back to His Excellency Simon Vilvafare, and please feel free to highlight a few key comments that you had made earlier, or sort of take us in a bit of a direction. But we will keep that brief so that we can open the floor to everyone who's joined us today and to share their knowledge and continue the conversation there. And then right at the very end, with a couple of minutes to spare, we'll just seek to recap on and identify a few kind of big ticket items that have been identified throughout this discussion. So I'm very happy for you to share the link and anything else that you might wish to add. And other than that, as soon as you've got your link, please share your knowledge. We all need to know it.
Yes, I've just sent the link. Can you confirm that you have seen it in the chat box?
Thank you. I can see the link there, though. If anyone else can't see the link, just click the chat button as part of the Zoom controls. Excellent. Thank you.
You can see it.
And feel free to follow that. So while people are following it, firstly, if there are any sort of technical issues, if anyone's having difficulty getting onto that link or commenting via that, that's fine. If you need to, please instead post your comment in the chat, and Thoa or myself will be able to copy that comment across to the board to make sure that everyone can benefit from your knowledge. If there's any other technical issues, please let us know. But in the meanwhile, please, happy to see everyone getting busy and leaving their comments. And now we'll have a couple of moments to hear further from His Excellency.
Thank you, Ray. I think in terms of policy, governance and public policy, I just need to mention a few things that I think they're so important for us to have good governance and public policy. First and foremost, I think it's so important to understand that Pacific Islanders are indigenous people to this region. And that I mentioned the three pillars previously, the three pillars of our society back home, that, culture and traditions are a big part of that. And that any policies that we put forward, any governance issue, mechanisms that we put forward must take into account the fact that we are first and foremost indigenous people of this region, and also that we already had a governance systems in place before the Westminster system for most of us in the region came. and that whatever policies and governance systems that we put in place, or we are going to strengthen, or we are going to support, we must not forget the pillars of our society, and the first one being our tradition and culture. And that being said, when you look into that, when you look at our traditional governance systems, I don't like to call it so much traditional, but the governance, local governance systems in place, we talked about people, the community is made of people. And so this is, again, so important that we have deep listening of the people. Especially if I'm a foreigner, if I come into the Pacific Island countries, if I come there, a lot of our panelists today have mentioned about listening, deep listening to the people. What are the people going to tell you? What kind of message are you going to give to the people? Is the governance system that you are going to put in place or you are going to support will fit the narratives of the people back home or not? And so deep listening is also key to success in terms of governance and public policies. Now, sometimes we see that public policies go this way and then the people go this way, and in no way they will meet at one stage. And so that is important, that we make sure that the people, their voice is heard, actually, their voice is heard through this governance and public policy. The last thing that I want to mention is around mismatch of policies and mismatch of governance, also governing policies. We tend to see sometimes that some development partners come into our region and they establish policies and they help our government actually putting together some governance system in place that do not fit our purpose at all. And I gave an example earlier around our judiciary systems. As much as we are grateful to partners and donors to come and support us in our judiciary systems, capacity building is needed. We cannot come and put in a whole structure in place, or to amend our judiciary system or whatever, without providing the crucial training to our, for example, our judges or our lawyers, in order for them to understand how the system is being used. So I will stop here. I will not dominate much, but I think my points are very clear.
Thank you very much. That is wonderful to hear the way you frame it as well. And certainly there's a very, very important role for universities to play, especially a Pacific located university. I certainly consider Australia as part of the Pacific. We're not just a neighbour to the Pacific. We are in and part of the Pacific. So certainly the role of our institutions is extremely important for that capacity building and supporting government and policy and institutions which still connect with and build from the local knowledge and tradition and culture. Please, I'd love to open the floor to anyone who'd like to make a comment, either following on from what we've heard or any other issues that you'd really like to bring up about ways of strengthening partnerships in the Pacific through collaboration with industry and government.
Right, there's one comment on the Padlet that flow very nicely to the point you just raised, that is, love the idea from the panel about deep listening, but also about developing collective visions as critical for partnership. So it's very important, like you say, Australia consider ourselves not just neighbor to the Pacific, we are part of the Pacific. So how do we develop a collective vision?
Thank you, Toa. That is very important. And I should also take the opportunity to add, where people do want to make comments on the board, please do add your name to a comment, because unfortunately they're coming up as anonymous. So it just means it makes it a little easy for us to follow up in conversation as well. But please, and don't hesitate to either raise your hand if that's easier, or just unmute. We've got a relatively small enough group that we can unmute and hear your thoughts on this topic.
Can I just add one more thing very quickly?
Please.
I'd like to add in terms of governance and public policy, and I mentioned during my introductory remark that Australia has some of the best institutions, technical and academic institutions in this country, and yet we've seen that we do not have access to these institutions because we don't have the funding. We can't have scholarships. Not all of us can have scholarships to come here. And I think I mentioned previously around the fact that Pacific Islanders should have more access to Australian tertiary education systems, and maybe having a model like the New Zealand model, whereby New Zealanders, our Kiwi brothers and sisters, can come here and study and pay the local fees. And I think this is something that should be open up to the rest of the Pacific as well, so that we are not considered as international students when we come to Australia. And for example, if you have to pay $30,000 a year as an international student for a program, rather than, you know, paying 10,000, I would say, or 15,000, it's a huge difference to us. And also some countries have done that already. Some countries, some first world countries have done that already, whereby they let citizens of other countries going and studying in their country under the quota system. Like, you know, I would say a country A will send 100 students to country B, and then, you know, they will say, because you are under the quota, you will just pay the local fees. And so governance and public policies, when we talk about them, you know, we need training, we need capacity buildings, we need our people to be educated in the Western world, because sadly, that's what it is. That's what it is. It's that the world is a global village. And so we need to understand your language. And when we understand your language, actually, then we can speak that language back. We can reply back to you. And by understanding that language actually means that we need to have access to the education sector in a much cheaper way that we are doing right now. Because as we see right now is moving forward, scholarships are not sustainable. Scholarship, but yet we are grateful for the scholarships that Australia, New Zealand, and other donors are providing to us, but they're not sustainable in the long run. And we need that openness of education, so that then there's flow of our people coming here and going back home and bringing that knowledge from these various Australian institutions that are highly, highly recognized across the world, actually back to our region. Then we can slowly see all this leapfrogging actually in our governance and policy, but also in other areas across the Pacific that are so important to the Pacific, like health.
Thank you, Fare. I personally, I couldn't agree more. I'm not in the position to make the policy on behalf of the government or UQ, but it's certainly a very interesting proposition. And I think, I mean, it even harks back to the very earliest years of academia, where study was done in Latin specifically as a mechanism for excluding parts of the population. Now, the financial systems that we've got can be pretty effectively exclude people as well. So it'd be wonderful if that can be a bridge opened up. And I see your comments earlier, we're getting a lot of nods and supports from people in the room as well. Is there anyone that would like to follow up on that topic in particular around that? Also happy to take it another direction. And I see Karen, you're in the room, and hello, and I see unmuting as well. Do you want to add your thoughts?
Can I just follow up? Yeah, you're right, Ray. There was so many nods. I was looking at when Your Excellency was saying that. And Ray, I thought you were going to mention then harking back to a time where university used to be free in Australia. So I thought that's what you were going to say. But
I should have gone there. That's the positive.
What would be the barriers to something like that? Like, where do we start to actually try and push for that, Your Excellency? Like, you're in Canberra, but, you know, I've never heard that proposed. Like, wow, I think it really drummed up a lot of support and excitement. I was trying to catch the provost's eye as well when you were saying it. Where do we start to really push for that?
We started back in 2019, especially around November, to already mention that when there was a proposition actually by the Australian government to bring our young Pacific Islanders to come and study high school in Australia. And the proposition that we made at that time would be that you bringing them here for 2.5 years, and then what happened? What is the sustainability of that scholarship? They call it Pacific Secondary School Scholarships. And so we questioned the fact that what would be the sustainability of the program? When these students finish in high school here, would you be able to sustain them? Would you be able to continue paying their scholarships to, let's say, TAFE or university studies in Australia? And the response we got was that they will finish here and go back to the region and apply for scholarships to go to different countries in the region. And we thought this was probably, not a better way to invest in education. And so we proposed the fact that maybe we could have the same model as New Zealanders that come here and study and pay the local fees in Australia. And I am a living example of that because, you know, France let me study in France without paying the international fees. And so that's the indirect support that they provide to countries. And hence I mentioned that some countries do that already. I'm not sure if they still continue doing that. But again, when I went there and studied, I didn't pay the international fees at that time. And so some countries are doing, and it's possible to do it. And you ask me, how can we do that? I think it would be something that we could could start a lobby actually within the consortium of universities across Australia, because we know that universities across Australia are there to make money first and foremost. And so maybe this is something that they could discuss together. And then we could also, on the other hand, work closely with the government in Canberra to make sure that, we push the idea forward. We've heard from the last information that we got was that there are some information going around at the moment. They're doing some sort of studies to indicate, if universities would be interested in that model. But I think it would be huge to do that for Pacific Islanders as well, because we're a family. We're a family after all. And I cannot let a member of my family actually come to my country and not trust my system and not trusting my system. And so that the more people you educate in your system, and with all other agreements that we have on board already, such as PACER Plus, the free trade agreement, a lot of businesses would like to come and establish in our Pacific Island countries, but they would like to come and establish with people that know the Australian system, for example, know the New Zealand system, for example. They do not have time to train people again or to retrain people again. So by opening up to the rest of the Pacific to have access to higher education in Australia, it will boost economy, it will boost a lot of different aspects of everyday living across the region. And, it would boost our health sectors as well, should we come and study here. Now, there are also some other negative side of it where, you could find brain drain and all of that as well. But again, it's something that should be on the table and we should talk about, and we should not stop talking about it. Thank you.
Thank you. And that's a brilliant point. I'll go to Paul in just a moment. I'll just add that I wonder, while you're making progress and perhaps developing those vehicles that others can be supporting that advocacy for that kind of approach, at kind of, like a whole of system top-down approach, I'm wondering also what vehicles there might be at a smaller scale for building examples of that. So for example, I'm at the group called the Centre for Policy Futures. We do a lot of work on capacity building, including we do a program around getting research into policy and practice so that academics can engage more effectively with policymakers and government. We haven't yet provided that to Pacific Island nations. Perhaps there's avenues for doing that, even though that we're one research centre within a very large university, etc. Perhaps there's a kind of a way at the scale of faculties or centres or within a university for building up a suite of those sorts of engagements. And I know Dole will have lots to say on that, working within UQID, but I might tag to Paul, who's done a lot of work in with and in the Pacific and a lot of experience engaging with government and industry as well. Paul, have you just, oh no, there he is.
Hi guys, I never fail to forget to turn my microphone off. Farid, that's a really fascinating, interesting, and great idea. And I think one of the fundamental problems with the way education for the Pacific family members is treated is it's put into the aid budget, and it is audited, and it is numerated, and it's not treated in a way that I think it should be. And you mentioned the New Zealand example, which is a really, really good example. And New Zealand and Australia are very close. The rhetoric at the policy level, and you'll hear this from Penny Wong recently with the change of the government, is that it is the word family is repeated time and time again, yet the relationships remain one of aid and accounting. And I think unless you can fundamentally change that, that system is that you're suggesting, which I think has got so many tangible and intangible benefits, short, medium, and long term, that wouldn't be possible. I recall one of my colleagues in Papua New Guinea. He's recently come here for a master's on an Australia Award scholarship. Incredibly onerous, time-consuming, just so he can do his master's. And he clearly is a smart guy. There are so many smart people who in the Pacific Island nations who are excluded from these things, because you really do have to be lucky and have an exceptional track record in order to get and access the higher education system here. If Australia wants to build those links and strengthen its partnerships in the region, what better way to do it than to build that huge network of alumni? Whether or not they go back to the Pacific Island nations, my guess is long-term people will go back and take their skills. Anyway, it's a fundamental questioning of the way aid and education is treated. And Twa, of course, is also very, very involved in that, having run so many Australia Awards courses in the International Development Unit. But thank you again for the comment. I think it's fascinating.
I think it's important that we think outside the box. And I think this is now the time for us to think outside the box and try and see how we can actually, propose some new partnerships, propose some new ways of seeing our region. Because again, when you have this flow of information, education, and everything else that happens between our region, the soft power is huge in the region. The soft power, vice versa. You understand us more, we understand you more, and the soft power is amazing in this region, and it will be hard for people to break that. And like you said, a huge quantity of alumni that can speak positively about their studies, their universities in Australia. And like you said, so many of our people have missed the opportunity just because we do not have the funding to come and study here. And I think universities can definitely help in that area in pushing this forward. And also, I'd like to mention also, like, we've already so well connected, actually. Look, when we want to make things happen, we make it happen. Look at labor mobility. Labor mobility is a big one that we're having with the Pacific region. Vanuatu is always the highest supplier of workers to Australia. As we speak right now, I think we stand around 7,000 or 8,000 already since the COVID was, since the opening of the borders and everything. And so it's so important, because that remittance that our people are sending back home, we estimated at least over $4 million that is sent back home monthly, for our people alone. And so imagine the impact that they have in Australia in this different agricultural region. I'll give you an example. The region of Mildura, that's a $600 million industry, table grape. And so which is dominated by Vanuatu workers over there. And so we're already connected. We can do so much already. And we've shown that during COVID, actually, even when the borders are locked, even when the strictest borders are locked, we managed to bring workers in this country. So if there's a will, we can do it. Thank you.
Thank you.
And also adding to the discussion around like what the government at the highest level can do, I think it's really fascinating and brilliant idea to have those major policies that would allow really easily accessible higher education for our neighbors and family in the Pacific nations, but also like at institutional level, like individually, each university and think tank organization in the Pacific and in Australia, we can also build very close working relationship and have particular programs to allow the exchange and sharing of knowledge and skills. So currently I'm working on the rolling out the implementation of UQ's plan to more closely engage with Pacific nations, and we've had some programs, for example, like the Fiji National University, which is coming to fruition. So really excited to see broader uptake of engagement with the Pacific by more Australian universities across the board. But I see that Terry Naki also have hands up, so I'll hand over to Ray.
Oh no, but please, I was going to go. Thank you, Toa, and please, Taranaki, you've made a wonderful comment online. I'm happy for you to share any of that you see fit.
Thanks, Ray. I just wanted to add some points in terms of references to what was said earlier regarding the the redefinition of what we mean by family when we talk about Australia and its relationship with the Pacific. But for the interest, I note that I have introduced myself in the board that was put up. But in any case, I'm the director for multilateral affairs of the University Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I think this is a very excellent dialogue, particularly as we kind of delve into a new momentum with the new Australian government coming into play. And the points that were discussed earlier by the panelists and some by His Excellency were quite remarkable. And I think we have the ability in this dialogue to kind of create and influence some new nuances. And what I wanted to talk about and what I added in the board was the need to ensure what we have often framed as contextual development. So when we talk about contextual development, as others have said before, we refer to development that is in line with the interests and priorities of the national government, right? That is in line with the priorities of the people. But in doing so, there's often a misplacement of these ventures when we do it through the channel of international development or foreign aid, because a lot of the work that is done in a way kind of diverts from what we would take to be an approach with family. And I think some of these elements need to be kind of needs to maturize in the conversation that we're having here in further dialogues, and I'm happy to get into it later. But I think some of these were picked up by His Excellency when he referred that, you know, as a family, we need to treat each other with more closeness. We need to begin to remove away some of the barriers that have been creating deficits in terms of our partnership. We need to think about how we, in this partnership that we're trying to develop, begin to recognize our own abilities. And I think Paul mentioned earlier that the Pacific is truly blessed to have the support of the Australia Award Scholarship, because it has built capacities across our region. I, for one, am a UQ alumni, and I was there in 2010, completing my first degree. But it also talks about how we need to recognize that there are clearly some deficits that we need to overcome.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nicole George from University of Queensland. Maybe we'll just start with a quick acknowledgement of country again, that we're meeting today here in Brisbane, at least on the lands of the Jagera and Turrbal peoples. And we just pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging leaders that will lead these communities into the future. And just also welcome any Indigenous people that might be joining us today. So I'm in the School of Political Science and International Studies here at the University of Queensland. I'll just throw also to my colleague who's helping facilitate, Simon.
Yeah, thanks, Nicole, and yeah, thanks everyone for coming. I'm Simon Albert. I'm a research fellow and lecturer here in civil and environmental engineering with a history of working in Melanesia. So yeah, it's really great to have you all here. It'll be a fairly informal session, so we're looking really just to try and gather some different perspectives to build on what our wonderful speakers have already had to say. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So what we thought we might do is just go back to the two presenters who were talking about research in the plenary session. So that was Winifredi Nanotha, is that correct?
Yeah, Espen is here.
And Espen as well. So Winnie may not be here, but we just wanted to ask if you had anything more that you wanted to add before we sort of open the floor to a more general discussion.
Well, one of the things that I found over the years, I mean, I've been working in the Pacific for 30 years now, and there are a lot of excellent graduate students coming out from the Pacific Island countries, working on areas of vital importance to the region, but very often they can't find employment in the islands, and they end up going off to Australia, New Zealand, the US, and elsewhere. So how can we find a way to bring their knowledge back to the region without disrupting their career paths? I mean, I know this for a fact. There was a young lady who was one of my proteges when I was working in the Marshall Islands. She ended up getting a high-level legal degree, and the rule was back then that she had to pay a 2-year bond, as it were, to the government. And come back and work for 2 years. But she got hired by a law firm in Hawaii that paid off the bond just like that, and gave her a high-paying position. So how can we bring our diaspora of scientists, legal minds, political scientists, how can we bring them back into contributing to the region? I mean, we're not going to stop people from pursuing careers and higher pay. That's just not possible. But how can we institute a system where we might be able to benefit from their knowledge and expertise, because it's sorely needed in the region?
Yeah, I think that's a really crucial point, Espen, and I think it's the next extension to that capacity building point that you raised earlier, of this sort of the shadowing of regional and international expertise with local expertise. So that's absolutely critical. Easter, from SPREP, did you want to build on your comments earlier that you'd already raised? Thanks.
Yes, thank you. Just to build on that, what I said earlier, and add to that, for SPREP, we've hosted field research from the universities. We had the University of Newcastle, some researchers, but I think what we need to look more into is to how can we have more researchers from Pacific Island countries take up some of the research work in the Pacific and working with organizations like SPREP. So perhaps it was mentioned in the remarks by His Excellency in terms of scholarships and providing that opportunity for students from the Pacific to take up some of this research work in their own respective countries and in the region, so that that knowledge is also shared with the region, and they bring with them as well their own experience and knowledge from their respective countries. So yeah, I'd like to see more of these and opportunities, either through formal scholarships or through specialized short-term training. I was very privileged at during my early years of my career to have had that opportunity to have specialized training with ANU in Canberra. So just wanted to put that on the table and to add on to what I mentioned earlier. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Easter. That's really, really critical, like you say, and formalising some of those scholarship ideas, I think, is an essential part of this puzzle. Just for those that have just joined us, we've just pasted in the chat as well a link to an online discussion forum that if you don't have a chance to speak, we've only got about 25 minutes to have this breakout room. So you can, as we're going, you can feel free to add some comments into that online link that's in the chat. You can add your name to those if you like, or if you're not comfortable, you can leave it as anonymous. That's perfectly fine. So I guess now we might like to hear some broader voices of different perspectives from others in the room. Maybe if we could start off with some of the Pacific voices, people from the Pacific that have joined us to share any perspectives you might have either on those points that Espen and Easter have already raised for us, or something different from a fresh perspective that you might have to share. So feel free to unmute yourself and share.
We also thought, the conversation sort of talking, I guess, at kind of a high level of experience around collaboration with regional agencies. But we also just thought we might throw in some questions that I guess just of a more, that allow you to reflect on a more personal, sort of from a more personalized perspective. Like, what has been your experience of collaborations, research collaborations, either across the Pacific or with researchers outside the Pacific working with you? And have you had good experiences? Have you had bad experiences? Let's create a safe space that you can share if you've had experiences that have been difficult. But I guess, maybe it's important, and the speakers have already given us a number of principles, but that form the basis of meaningful and positive collaborations. But it might also be good to talk about the risks and the challenges if you would like to. You don't have to name names, of course, but yeah, we'd really be interested to hear some of those personal perspectives as well.
Yes, anyone that would like to share, feel free to unmute yourself, turn your camera on. Yeah, Mary?
Yeah. Hi everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, I'm Mary, and I'm a PhD student at UQ, and I'm from Fiji. I just want to add on to Esther, who spoke about scholarships. So I worked before I came to do this PhD, I've worked for more than 15 years. And the thing is, after I finished my master's, and most of my colleagues in Fiji, a lot of them, they have finished their master's, but they couldn't proceed to PhD because there was no scholarships available. For AusAid scholarship, they stopped providing PhD scholarships. So for many of the colleagues and our friends and families back in Fiji, when we've reached master's level, we just stopped there. And for me, by the grace of God, I was able to get a UQ scholarship, and that is why I'm here today. So that is just the point I wanted to raise today, Vinaka. Thank you.
Vinaka,
it's great you're here at UQ too. Well done. But yeah, I guess you're really sort of raising an important issue there about, you know, the kind of break on career progression and your inability to do that in your home country. I can see that Tapan has their name up as well.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, look, it is really nice to really catch up. I know it's a lot of things happening at the same moment, but I still thought I should just say I was previously once with UQ, but now I'm a professor at University of Southern Queensland here. So my research has a particular focus on developing countries in the Asia Pacific in general, and in particular, I'm in the area of finance. So is looking at mainly financing aspect of this development, like financing the sustainable development, because I have traveled a little bit in these areas in the Pacific, like Fiji and PNG. The main issues there is how to source the finance for lots of different areas, you know, infrastructure is one of them. And secondly, these countries are also highly sort of impacted by natural disasters. So how to find finances to really good and, you know, infrastructure for them and communication. So I have been working with Asian Development Bank in this area, that what kind of model we need to do, like private-public partnerships and so on. And it has been published recently, this sort of paper. And I'm really keen to really, you know, focus and do research. That's why among these 4 areas, I have chosen these research collaborations. So I'm really keen to find new good PhD students coming from this region to do with me in this area, but also I'm very keen and upfront that I'm really interested to work in this area.
Thanks very much. Excellent. Thank you, Tapan. I'm not sure we can, I mean, I guess, I'm not sure that we'll be able to find you PhD students or resources, but it's good to meet you. I know that you've got that research capacity and interest and to build the network. Yeah, fantastic. Are there others that would like to share thoughts or reflections? Yes, Yvette?
Yeah, Yvette, feel free to unmute yourself.
We can see that Yvette has actually been pretty active on the Padlet. I think she might be one of our Padlet contributors. We can't necessarily hear you at the moment, Yvette. Maybe you're on mute and you don't realize, or else maybe if anyone is interested in some of Yvette's thoughts, she's added some really interesting reflections on the Padlet about, let me just recap a couple of them here, which is really interested in environmentally wise development. I like the use of the term wise and wisdom. And she also talked about, I guess, the ways in which to develop productive relationships between researchers in the Pacific and maybe people coming from outside, and that this has to be rooted in ancestral knowledge and ancestral activity. Maybe cultural sensitivities there too. So thanks, Yvette. Maybe Asanati. Hi, Asanati.
Bula, Nicole.
Bula.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too.
Thank you. So yeah, so I'm in Canberra and working in a research firm. And we do a lot of collaboration, you know, with teams from the Pacific. So I just want to sort of share my own sort of reflections and thoughts on this. And I really thank you, you know, for the opportunity to meet on this very important topic. When we talk about capacity building for our Pacific counterparts, you know, I'm sort of like always thinking of the local universities there. And Nicole, you are familiar with the USB, and building research capacity really, I think, you know, should be a core kind of activity for local tertiary institutions. So working out how to support their work in that area and support in turn long-term support as well. So that would be a possibility because, you know, little things like how to respond to a TOR, how to respond to specific selection criteria in a particular TOR, and how to align your budget, your proposed budget to, you know, a particular sort of prospect. You know, I came from Samoa, not knowing any of that, had a master's degree and tried to learn some of that, you know, while teaching at USP. So, you know, it's really important, those little fine details. And that to me, I think those are the kinds of technical kind of skills that our, you know, people in the Pacific would probably need. And I think academia, UQ, would be really useful to have some kind of, you know, capacity building sort of program in those kinds of areas. Yeah, and I think for staff teaching at these, you know, at the local institutions, as well as students. So programs through their curriculum kind of thing would be quite useful, I think. Thank you.
Thanks, Asanati. I think that's so important. I guess what you're sort of saying is more skills transfer between centers of academic learning, which, yeah, I mean, some of us kind of come in and do a module once every couple of years.
Yeah.
Really enough, is it? It's a start, but it's not enough. So, thank you. That's really insightful. I also know that just through my contact with people at USP, and I think this has probably happened to you, Asanati, when you were there, is that there is an endless request for you to be involved in research, isn't there? It's often hard to absorb all those requests. It's way more than you can do. So I think we also need to recognize that, you know, that often local researchers, and probably, Espen, that might be your experience too, that once you're in the region and you're recognized, the requests are almost endless on your skills and demands for your time and that kind of thing. So yeah, I can see that Vanessa and Espen have both put their hands up. Please put your hand up or put something in the chat or write on the Padlet, whatever works. So Vanessa, maybe I'll go to you and then to Espen, if that's okay. Sorry.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? I just have my headphones on.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. I'm Vanessa. I work as a PhD. I'm a PhD candidate with the Griffith Institute for Tourism. And I guess for me personally, I'm here because I want to connect with Pacific Islanders because I'm doing my research on regenerative tourism, and my case study is in the Solomon Islands. And I'm from a small island developing nation as well, in the Caribbean, the Dominican Republic, and I understand the importance of, you know, conducting culturally appropriate research and decolonizing research methodologies and all that. But obviously, because the context of the Pacific is quite different to my own background, I would really value people's input on how to frame my research, culturally appropriate, and any insights that you might have that might be helpful for me as I start preparing my questionnaires and even my data collection process and all that. So thanks.
Great to connect, Vanessa. Yeah, and I think, you know, just obviously you being conscious of those issues, it's a really important point that we often think about the Pacific as a generalist term, but obviously there's so much cultural diversity and environmental diversity amongst the islands that it's really important to, you know, culturally nuanced research, I think is what the term was coined in the initial session. I think that's so critical to learn about the local context to make sure that, you know, one size doesn't fit all in the Pacific. So that's a great point.
Yeah, exactly. So any suggestions or anything, I really welcome them.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, Espen, did you want to contribute?
Yeah, well, I just want to respond quickly to Vanessa. So when I started working in the Marshall Islands, I had to work through my seniors because I was told I shouldn't speak until I got grey hair. So I'm sorry if it's not to discourage you, but it's at least in the Marshall Islands that was until you had some grey hair, you were not you could be seen but not heard. But I wanted to bring up a point around some of the sort of opportunities for mentoring. So many years ago, there was a very clever friend of mine from Vanuatu. He worked in the Met Service, and he gave me some stats around cyclones and intensity. And he had actually jotted down on this piece of paper, and he had proven that cyclones that hit Vanuatu at the margins of the cyclone season were more intense now than they were 20 years ago. And I said to him, this is fantastic. This is information that needs to be brought out. And I said, well, can you write it up? And he goes, no, I don't have time. I'm busy. So we managed to get together some funding and managed to get him a sort of not a tutor or a mentor, just somebody to help him to write this up as a scientific paper, and he got it published in the end. I mean, this is the sort of thing that that I think can really enhance scientific collaboration across the region, because there are people who have this type of information. It's just that they have a day job. They don't have the time to go through all the rigmarole of doing an academic study on the subject. So I think using that methodology, I mean, we were able to bring this paper out into, I forget which journal it was now, but anyway, he got it published, and it caused a big ruckus because this was not something that policymakers really wanted to hear. So anyway, thanks.
Excellent. Yeah, no, that's a great point. And sometimes that, you know, those relatively small interventions, Espen, can lead to really powerful outcomes compared to, you know, we're often thinking about these big, mega complex, multinational projects, but sometimes it can be as simple as quite a small effort to partner a couple of people together to produce some really critical research results. So that's a really important point. Yvette, I might just check in with you. Have you sorted your microphone? I can see a couple of Yvettes now. Yeah, wonderful. Go ahead, Yvette.
Hi. So you can hear me now?
Yes.
Yes,
yeah.
we can.
I'm sorry, I have to change to my phone so I can connect. Yeah, I just want to, I'm Yvette, and I'm studying currently at USP here in Fiji. I'm from Vanuatu. I want to share with you the challenges that I come across during my research. I'm doing a master's in climate change. So when we talk about this, I feel I would like to say thank you for having the privilege to join you in this dialogue. So during my research, supposed to go to Vanuatu on the 2020, which is when the COVID-19 hits and this closed down. And I couldn't go because closed down, and I have to change everything, my research side and everything. So what I do is going around here in Fiji to get approval of my research permit and all these things. It's another challenge. So I couldn't get a research permit, which is where it causes me a delay. And my scholarship also, it's about to due. And I have to think of other plans, options, so that I can get my research done. And have to work really hard to go through the YouTube, find ways of how to get the data back in Vanuatu. So I use this tool, the Cobot Toolbox, and that's why I want to share with you like how we can find ways so we can get through the research side if we come across all these things. Come across this research tool, the Cobot Toolbox. I don't know if you heard about this. I have to design my question on the Cobot Toolbox. So the questions have to I have to find research assistant back in Vanuatu who are also doing the same, have the background information about my research, and maybe university graduates and all this, so that they can carry out my research because they have the idea and all this. And I have to find, identify graduates, and I manage. And what I did is the research has to, they have to access the questionnaire through their mobile phones, where they have the password, and so it's more like a survey, filling survey as a monkey survey thing, but it's a Cobot Toolbox, a tool that we use in rural areas, and it works out, and it's interesting as well to hear Miss Madam Winnie Verity from UNDP, how when she mentioned about the context, like how to get the information from the research. And that's where I come across. I really want to go there to get the data myself so I can get what I really need. And unfortunately, I couldn't get there. And that's one thing that I didn't even though I'm from Vanuatu, but some of the things, the culture is diverse. And some of the things from this community that my research site in, I couldn't get it. So most of the information that I want, it's not really there. I only got the ones that I inserted into that Cobot Toolbox. And so what I did is, although I have portion of my data, I still keep on follow up with some of the information that I really need. And it's interesting, and it's important as well when Madam Winnie Ferretti mentioned about the methodology that we have to use. We have to use like storytelling, dialogue in a traditional way, how to get that data, instead of we going to the community and ask questions directly to the community, that's not their way of communicating.
Thank you, Yvette. I'm sorry to cut you off. It's just we've only got a bit of time, and all I want to say
I'm sorry about that.
No. What I want to say is congratulations on being such an incredibly resilient researcher and dealing with the challenges of climate change. Well, yes, climate change, but also COVID, because that is the mark of someone who has you've developed great skills under very trying circumstances. So well done. I'm sorry to cut you off, but we've only got a couple of minutes, and I can just see that Easter has her hands up, and then maybe a couple of others that also want to jump in just before we get called back into the plenary. But thank you, Yvette. I'd love to hear more about your journey.
Thank you.
So Easter, did you want to add something?
Yes, quickly, just building on what maybe something to help Yvette and also perhaps Vanessa. Just wanted to say that there are resources that we have available here at SPREB. If you're looking for data, we have the Pacific Environment Portal. If you're looking for environment data in the area of waste management and also climate change, we have established also in each of the countries that we work with these national environment data portals. So that's a good source of data for those researchers who are looking for data. And also we have a virtual library. There's tons of information and publications that's available there, please do go through the Spread Virtual Library if you're looking for information. Vanessa, in terms of culturally appropriate research and how to go about it, one of the things that you probably need to do is identify a local person to work with that will be able to provide some guidance to you. Of course, there are protocols that you will need to also follow. Just wanted to add those two additional comments to the conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Easter. Appreciate your contribution. I'll message you, a direct message you as well to get the links for those resources, please. Thanks.
Great, thanks so much, Easter. Are there any final points? I think, Kylie, did you have your hand up a bit earlier, or anyone else just before we move back into the main room?
All right, welcome everybody to the breakout room on teaching. Today, we have our speaker, Bertha Toppenheim, with us, and I am Dr. Amy Hubble from the School of Languages and Cultures, where I'm the Director of Teaching and Learning for the school. I'm just going to ask the other facilitators to introduce yourselves very quickly.
Hi everyone, I'm Tamara Weisvlog, Manager Strategy and Partnerships at UQ.
Hi everyone, my name is Sheridan Rabbit. I'm the Senior Project Officer for the Centre for Marine Science here at UQ.
And Bertha, would you like to say anything about yourself?
Good afternoon, everyone. Bertha Tongahai from the little island of Niue. Population 1,600, 14 villages. Niue is a self-governed in free association with New Zealand since 1974. And 2018 New Zealand census, 30,000 plus Niue peoples. And 2016 population in Australia, 4,958. But I believe it's safe to assume that that number has reached 10,000 by now. So, just looking forward to sharing the discussion with everybody and see how we can strengthen partnerships in terms of education. We were used to send students to Australia, and we have a lot of graduates from Australian universities, but that stopped in 2010. So I hope this dialogue will also be a catalyst for reviving or resuscitating our postgraduate students to return and study in Australian universities. We're also grateful to the New Colombo plan. We have students from UQ coming across. We were looking forward to 6 students coming across last year, but COVID happened. So hopefully it will happen in the near future. So I'll stop there and hear from the others. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We're a very small group today. I'm just wondering if Monica and, we have 3 people, Bree and Stuart, would you be willing to introduce yourselves really quickly?
Should I go first?
Go for it.
I need to clarify that I don't have much to do with teaching at all, so I apologize in advance.
No problem.
My name is Bree. I'm from USQ in Toowoomba, and my current involvement in the Pacific is working with University of Sunshine Coast to implement a postgrad program at USP and FNU. So we're supported by ACR. So I'm coming in to learn or something from a postgraduate level of Fijians and Samoans in country rather than coming out into Australia. So if I'm in the wrong spot, I'm sorry.
No, it's great. Perfect. That's wonderful. Monica?
I'm coming in to learn. I have just graduated a Bachelor of Nutrition at the University of Sunshine Coast, and I'm leading a scoping study on to systematically scope the global school food environment. But my PhD application is geared towards the school food environment within the Pacific, and so I want to learn more of how to engage to have more meaningful impact.
Wonderful. Stuart?
Hey, welcome everyone. Bula Vanaka.
Stuart, I'm currently a station manager for Heron Island Research Station for University of Queensland, but I spent the last 3 years in the Pacific. I was head of the Marine School at USP for 3 years and senior lecturer there. And I've still got about 10 postgrad students, 5 PhD and 5 master's students that I'm supervising. Yeah, I guess I'm here to sort of be involved. Obviously, I've a great stake in the Pacific, and I very much enjoy the teaching and collaboration focus.
Thank you for that. We were welcome to introduce ourselves on the Padlet. I don't know if you're all familiar with the Padlet, but the link is in the chat, and Sheridan's also happy to take your comments. But we have a goal today to come up with some distilled discussion with suggestions about things that we can do to build collaboration. And there are some focused questions here on the chat as well, that we can add some general comments on how we feel that partnerships can be strengthened through the Pacific, through education and educational exchange especially. And I know that sounds like something that everybody here is actually invested in as well. Sheridan, I didn't let Sheridan, I'm sorry. Sheridan and Tam, could you please introduce yourselves?
I think we just introduced ourselves very briefly, where we're from, but probably not a broader overview. So I might just give a bit of a broader overview. So I've been working in the Solomon Islands for the past 7 years now. Lived in the Solomon Islands for a bit as well. So I'm very interested in the Pacific. My research is largely on fisheries, but my interest in teaching particularly, I have been working on a program with the University of California that is led by UQ in the Solomon Islands. And yeah, I guess really interested in and thinking about how we can use teaching as a way to strengthen our partnerships with those in the Pacific region.
Oh no, that's great, Sheridan. So my background is international recruitment, partnerships, global mobility, and I'm currently the New Colombo Plan Lead at UQ. So very happy to answer any questions you might have in those areas.
And just specifically, I was invited to facilitate because I have a French program in New Caledonia where my students go and learn French intensively, mostly in Nouméa, but sometimes we are able to go to the outer islands as well. And they have a strong cultural exchange component while they're there on site, and they're getting ready to leave on the 25th. So very, very soon. All right, thank you, everybody. What is the best way for us to go about having the discussion? I'm wondering if anyone wants to kick us off, if you have any suggestions on how we can strengthen those partnerships. And Bertha, I know you probably have prepared some talking points as well on each of those. Well, everybody's going to be shy.
Well, Amy, why don't we start with, there was one of our participants, Bree, I think you mentioned you had an interest in post-grad collaboration with the Pacific. Was that right?
Yeah. So yeah, I've come into this session. So I do supervise lots of students here, and look, part of the program is providing both students and academics with some support in terms of academic support. So from setting up little 3-minute thesis competitions to research proposals, so basic stuff. But I guess what I wanted to make sure what we were doing right was sort of targeted to the Pacific. So I was going in as an Australian, and like the way we were doing things, is it the right way to I'm not good with my words all the time, but yeah, is it good? What we're doing, is it the right way to get the message across in different cultures?
So your main concern is then thinking through the ways in which the knowledge is transmitted.
Yeah. So I can just go on autopilot to think what I think is best, but I don't always get feedback about whether it is a good way to give that knowledge. There's lots of lots of positive comments coming back from the students, but yeah, am I targeting the right thing essentially? I know I'm being quite vague, but I guess it's at cultural differences in how education is done at that high degree level.
I think that's a really important question. Bertha, I'm wondering if you have any comments that you can make about that cultural level of how we can make sure that knowledge is transmitted in an appropriate way between us, between our students, between educators as well.
UQ has the New Colombo plan where students apply to come to Niue, well, not just Niue, but other countries in the Pacific. And, you know, that's an excellent program, even though the students do not have any cultural orientation back at UQ. But when they arrive, we usually give them a cultural orientation for the first week, and then they start working. So we had one student who was working with the Taonga Niue heritage, and you know he was exposed to all sorts of heritage stuff. And I think he also did some policies for the Taonga Niue department. One student worked with us and tidied up all our policies for education. You know, she had a great time and enjoyed it. It's only 3 months, but I believe 3 months is good. And I mean, I'm a former alumni of the University of South Queensland. I completed my Masters of Education extramural. So, I mean, that's something that we can collaborate, and I'll be happy to, you know, email each other, agree, or, you know, because I have contacts with other CEOs of Pacific Education in the Pacific. So I guess it depends if there are cultural orientations or at the moment we're working on our cultural competencies documents to be available to our non-Niue teachers. We have teachers coming from the Philippines, Fiji, Tonga, Samoa. So it's just taking them to the villages, familiarize themselves with students, like overnight camp in the weekend where some families adopt them to take them to their plantations, go fishing, go to church, because religion is also quite high with our culture. And I totally believe in those 3 pillars that the Vanuatu High Commissioner mentioned earlier. So I'm sure that there's going to be quite a lot of stuff that will come out of this dialogue that will also go into shaping how Australia will collaborate with the Pacific in terms of cultural orientation for students as well as cultural safety for teachers, etc. Hope that helps.
Thank you.
But is the cultural orientation is something that was requested, or was it something that was that initiated on your side?
From our side, we have cultural orientations for new teachers coming from other Pacific Island countries. So, you know, learning the basic language like Bangahaunipe, taking them around to other departments, other relevant stakeholders of education, participating in cultural festivals, you know, that's happening during their time, like the celebration of the yam season, you know, where the yam is placed in, usually happens at Easter. During October, we have the constitutional commemoration. So Niue will turn 50 years of self-government with New Zealand in 2024. So that would also be quite huge. Hopefully some UQ students will be coming across in 2024.
That's great. So I'm trying, and if you have questions and comments and you want to put them on the Padlet, that's okay. I just made a note of the cultural considerations that we're discussing now and how we can be prepared and be preparing our students. So I'm happy to know that that's something that you know that you provide for people when they come over. It puts a lot of responsibility on you as well, though, however, to make sure that people are well prepared for what they're about to do. So there's that onus on us as well. If we're preparing our students to go outbound, what are we doing to prepare our students? And I have students from all different kinds of cultures actually who go on this trip to New Caledonia. So a lot of them are they're not native English speakers necessarily. But that is something that we provide here on site as well, that we prepare our students through some historical and cultural background. But my students are particularly charged with a cultural activity where they have to interview people and do research while they're on site. So they have all chosen a topic that they will be exploring, and usually it's cultural or historical in nature, but more and more so New Caledonia is pushing, they're trying to promote the biodiversity and environmental factors as well. And so that's something that they're keen for our students to study when they come to New Caledonia, and they're preparing cultural presentations as well on site. So when my students go there, they are presented with a lot of cultural immersive activities, and also some that are tailored to their research projects. Does anyone else have things they want to share on that topic?
Maybe I'll jump in, Amy. So the UC program that we used to run, may run again. Cultural orientation is a big part of that program. We actually bring in the students at UQ from the South Pacific Islander Association. So we do language training with them before we send them off. So they do training in Pidgin so that they have some basic understanding before they go. And they also do a whole bunch of cultural training around what is and is not appropriate clothing, what is and is not appropriate behavior, and that sort of thing before we send them off as well. And I do think it's important that the onus is on us and not on Pacific Island countries, as we've just talked about as well, because I think that, yeah, if we're sending students over, it is appropriate for us to make sure that they are being culturally appropriate once they get there, I think.
I just had a question more through just the topic of teaching and education exchange, more for Stuart, because Stuart, you were based in the Pacific for a couple of years. For our audience here, so is there any particular, I guess, teaching or exchange area that you think would be good for the audience to consider if considering like a research collaboration, research project development, academic exchange, for example?
Yeah, I think exchanges are really good as long as they're balanced. You know, you need to understand that for Fijians and for anyone in the Pacific, they're not as, what's the word? They're not as single-minded towards careers. And so a lot of opportunities that are presented don't get fulfilled because they don't have many of the things that are important for the locals. So things that are important to things like family, interaction, social interaction, that it's fun, those sort of things. So, you know, for a lot of people going, we had, remember at my school, we had there was 30 of these scholarships to China, and we couldn't never get a single person to go to China because the thought for them to go to China and be so isolated was just never an option. Australia is, of course, very favoured because everyone that I met has a relative or someone they know who lives in Australia. So there's a kind of a sense of being part of the family. That does make a big difference. So it's very important when you consider exchanges that for many Pacific people, this is quite a frightening and isolating time. And you need to understand that they need some supportive network in place. Otherwise, they'll just pack up and come home. That's for them to come to, say, a place like Australia or somewhere else. For Australians to go to the Pacific, it's obviously, you've touched on a few issues about cultural awareness, and clearly that's extremely important, but not always easy to get on top of because it's often very subtle You need to be very much open-minded and aware and observant, and you need to figure out how you can navigate through that space. If you have an open mind and you're open and you're prepared to sit and listen and do all those sort of things, then you'll go far, because they do accept that you need to be taught certain protocols, and so there is an acceptance that they have a role to also educate you, but you need to be willing to be educated, and that's been a big problem in the past, that people come across with attitude issues, and it's an area that we had to deal with a little bit. Does that answer some of those questions?
Yeah, no, it does. Thank you, Stuart. It's also good to get your expertise from when you were in country. We, from a UQ perspective and from a sponsored student perspective, which is a team I was previously managing, you know, we did have, in this particular semester, we have quite a big contingent of Pacific Island students coming in under predominantly Australia Awards scholarships. Yes, it is a highly competitive Australian government program, but they are generally for degree level programs and for research, PhDs and Masters of Philosophy. But also one area that perhaps universities could think of perhaps more broadly for the Pacific, based on some of your comments, Stuart, about being away from home and family commitments, etc., is the short-term research visitations, research exchange, whether it's for a couple of weeks, it might be a month, just to get a taste of conducting some field work overseas, using the UQ laboratories, etc. And there might be, if there was a formal ICA, International Cooperation Agreement, or MAU, there could be a discussion with the grad school about the potential for some funding support for the mobility for those students as well.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. I would very much support some sort of shorter visitation type role where they can, say, visit and be engaged with a really a strong supportive culture for that short period, because they will just lap it up. You'll have queues of people wanting to come and do that. Compared to
it can be in both directions as well. So, for example, yes, it could be BRE sending two students together for a month or 6 weeks, and then later two students come back to USQ, for example.
Yeah,
and share ideas and practices.
Yeah, in my classes, for instance, I'd often have a lot of Americans and Norwegians and some Germans who would come across and spend, you know, a one semester, a whole year or something within the Pacific as a student. And I can't tell you how much they loved it, because they just found a fantastic experience, because that longer period for many of those cultures is really important, because it gives them a chance to get the language a bit right and settle in. You know, it's slow, you know, needs to be taken at a slow pace, and it works really well. But I think the whole idea of them then coming back over to, say, Australia or America or wherever is also very welcomed, and it could be extremely powerful, because that person, you know, the biggest issue I had in teaching there, and I had a big teaching load, taught many classes, is my main goal was just developing confidence in the local students. They were excellent students. I really loved them, and they'd work hard. They were really smart and they were very capable, but they lacked confidence, and partly because they don't get that exposure that we push so heavily in Australia for a whole range of experiences that develop that culture of confidence. So they're often thinking that they're not as capable as they perhaps could be. So there's a lot of my responsibility was to show them that, yes, you are capable. Yes, you can publish. Yes, you can do this. Yes, you might not have had some of those experiences, but you've got many others. And building on that was probably my main focus and achievement, to be honest.
Excuse my naivety. Would it not be beneficial to invest in Pacific Island universities, increasing the capacity of the educators that are from the Pacific and teaching, already addressing those cultural considerations? I wonder if there's a lot of emphasis on bringing students to Australia and teaching them, and wonder if it's more so we need to build capacity of the universities there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point, Monica. You know, that was our main program, and as head of school, I was very much promoting local people, but the bottom line is local people needed some extra push to help them gain those experiences to be a senior lecturer or professor, because they needed, you know, they needed all those things that add up to being that academic. And for many of them, they don't, it's very hard to get that, you know, they don't get the money to do those things. So if they can spend some time in Australia, picking up skills, picking up expertise, particularly picking up networks of people who they can call and go, you know, I don't understand how to approach this. The person can go, you know, great, I can help you. I used my networks extensively from Australia. I do pity my poor friends who had to put up with my demands, but you know, for CSIRO, AIMS, and a number of universities were sending across equipment to me so I could get master's students and PhD students to do work at an international standard, because I knew that the way they were doing it previously, it wasn't going to work. It just not, you just couldn't publish on it. Yeah.
We're going to have the room closed in about 3.5 minutes. Bertha, I'm just wondering what you see from your standpoint. What's needed in your perspective?
In terms of culture?
Not necessarily, yeah, well, it could be culture. Anything to do with teaching. What's needed from your perspective?
Well, with the Pacific Regional Education Framework that Australia is funding at present, there is still a lack of capacity in the Pacific countries to implement all these ambitious activities. So I think that should also be taken into consideration, because it's one thing to have all these activities and who is going to implement it. You know, for example, myself, I'll be doing all these fields as my principals. They'll be busy running the schools. So more often you ended up doing all these other work. So capacity building is very vital to enhancing the education systems in the Pacific. Cultural training, cultural competency should be developed for what that can happen under labor mobility with non-Pacific Island teachers coming across. That's also important. So that's also being addressed under the PACER Plus qualifications recognition and labor mobility project that Australia is funding. But I take that point in terms of creating confidence in local capacity as well. They need to take ownership in terms of taking education forward rather than just relying on overseas capacity. So, for example, we lack male teachers in the primary schools. Inclusive education is also important in the Pacific countries. With the increase in the number of special needs students, we haven't done any research here, but I'm assuming that one of the factors could be, you know, how parents just give their mobile phones and gadgets to the children. You know, that could be one factor. Girls continue to outperform boys in the schools. I don't think there has been any research being done to identify factors that would assist male students. You know, we have few and far between successful male students coming across, you know, gaining ducks in their classes. So, you know, there's quite a few barriers to education for some of the students. So, but those are some of the areas that I could think of at the moment.
Thank you for that. I've been adding some notes to the Padlet. I welcome you all to continue to add some of your own suggestions to the Padlet, because we're going to try to bring these all back around together for a group discussion if possible. The room's about to close. You don't need to do anything. You'll be brought back automatically to the main session. So don't worry about leaving the Zoom session, because that will just make you jump out of Zoom entirely. But you will have a Q&A session that will also be available. So we just have a few more seconds. I don't know if anyone else wants to say anything or ask any questions, especially from Bertha.
Welcome back, everyone, and thank you for participating in those breakout room discussions. I've popped into each one as they were happening. So some really great discussions there, and I'm hoping that we can also discuss some of those points in some more detail in the panel discussion that's coming up soon. Right now, though, we're gonna have a presentation, a speech and a presentation from the South Pacific Island Association of the University of Queensland. So I'd like to now introduce Mr. Tapananga Jr. Polatevao Rupena, who will give a speech to introduce the association and their performance. So over to you, TJ. Thank you.
Thank you, Benny, and thank you to the Global Development team for inviting us on here today. The University of Queensland South Pacific Islander Association acknowledges the Yagara people as the First Nations owners of the waterways, skies, and lands on which UQ now stands. As Pacific people, we acknowledge and honour the connection Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islanders have to their lands and seas. We pay respects to their elders, laws, customs, and creation spirits. We recognise that this land always was and always will be Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander country. Sovereignty was never ceded, and that the fight for justice, the fight for truth, and the fight for treaty continues. And as good allies, as Indigenous people ourselves from the Pacific, we should walk with them on that journey towards justice, towards truth, and towards treaty. But without further ado, tala falava, malolangi mam, la soifo manuia, whakalawhalai kam, na benani Maori, noa ia, pula vinaka, rana nim, halo keta, halo wantox, kia ora, and Pacific greetings to you all. Just a little introduction about the club I'm part of, the UQ South Pacific Islander Association. Just like to start off with a story. There's no better way to explain things as Pacific Islanders. We love our stories. We love telling our stories. Storytelling is in our blood, and so is exaggerating those stories. But today's story is about one of our close friends. His name is Julio Alikesanita Palotupo He Moana. Julio is both Tongan and German, was raised out in Narrabri, New South Wales. His first encounter with UQ Spear was 2 years ago, and it was also during that year that Julio had his first experience dancing in a Tongan item. Since he was raised mostly in rural areas of New South Wales, his only exposure to the Tongan culture was through his older sister and father, and is one of the many reasons why he joined up with Spear, to learn more about his Tongan culture. We're not sure if we've done that, nevertheless. When Spear's Culture Night was filmed, was released online in 2020. Julio's sister showed their dad the video of him dancing the Tongan item, and his dad cried watching his son perform and represent Tonga through song and dance. And through this mana moment, I personally believe that this is one of the main tenets that UQ Spear is what we stand to do for our members, to provide an avenue for all our members to reconnect and represent their culture and any Pacific culture they are willing to partake in. My name is Tapananga Jr. Polatevao Rupena. I am an Australian-born Samoan from the villages of Samatau, Falelatai Matanofo, Falevao, Fasikokai, Lepa, and Matatufu in Upolu, and Whangaee, Sasinga, and Lekui in Savaii. And I am the current president of the UQ South Pacific Islander Association, otherwise known as UQ Spear. A little history, we'll start from the beginning. UQ Spear officially became an association the 18th of November 2014. Beginning with just a few Pacific students, we have now grown to a community of 150 students of Pacific and non-Pacific heritage. From its early conception to our founding members to our current members, we have continued to build on the legacies of culture, community, and challenge, which also happens to be our motto. As to why our founding members gathered to make this club, I can only wonder, but in its current status, Spear's a home away from home. a busy one that sometimes our parents question, a gathering of like-minded people to connect with each other, to reconnect and proudly showcase our culture, to advocate for the Blue Pacific, to leave a legacy that will continue to benefit the next generations of Pacific tertiary students. This is reflected within our mission statement as an association to strengthen the presence of and empower Pacific Islanders on and off campus at the University of Queensland, to create a network of old, new, existing and potential students in the University of Pacific and non-Pacific Islander background, to recognize, celebrate the rich and diverse cultures of the Pacific, to be involved in the wider community. Also reflected within the work that we've been doing since our club's beginning. Since then, we have gone on to create an event called Inspire, to play on words with the word inspire. INSPIRE and INSPIA invites Pacific and Māori high school students to UQ for a whole day student summit to raise their aspirations for tertiary education and to inspire them that they can achieve and succeed here at university, especially in this context of global development and touching on the former points of former speakers about global development on a local context. We know that here in Australia that our Pacific youth are missing out on the opportunities of higher education and the flow-on effects that that will have with our communities, diaspora communities here in Australia and the Pacific. And so we created this event in light of that, so that we can raise the aspirations of our youth. Alongside this, we've created our UQ Spear Scholarship Fund. I believe is one of the first funds funded by a club at UQ for their members. We are lucky that we might be possibly able to launch it next semester for diaspora and international students who are looking to lessen the burden of the financial stress that these fees have on our youth. But without further ado, we'll now move on to our performance today. Today's performance from the island of Harambe, home to the Banabin people. Despite the troubled history of colonization through the phosphate mining that rendered Barnabas uninhabitable and climate change and its effects, the continued sea level rising, acidification of the ocean and soil, as well as coral bleaching, affecting our ways of sustenance and inundation of freshwater supplies to the point of importing water, the resilient Barnabin people have continued to survive and grow in the face of adversities. We at UQ Spear, through our teacher, Iborito Te Anang, hope that we have showcased the beauty, the strength, and the resilience of the Barnabin people. We hope to showcase that we are still surviving, still living, still thriving on our God-given homelands, and that through real climate action and leadership here in Australia, we can hope to have more meaningful and genuine connections that benefit the Blue Pacific and Australia as a whole. We are not drowning, we are fighting for the future generations of Pacific youth, fighting so that we can continue to stay on our homelands for the next thousands of years, as we have in the past 1,000 years. But without further ado, just like to introduce our item from the island of Rambi.
Rambi, an island off the coast of Fiji, is home to the Banabin people of Kiribati. Despite their history, the form of dance and attire differs greatly between the cultures. From the pace to the custom of dance, each dance has been passed down from generation to generation, detailing their histories and origins. Their history is rich in tales of the movement and growth of the Banabin people. This is Rambi.
Away, away,
you enjoyed that entertainment message from the South Pacific Islanders Association of the University of Queensland. We're heading now into the panel discussion. While you were having your breakout room discussions, I managed to pop into each one of those rooms. So it was really fascinating to hear the discussions that were happening in those rooms. And we'd like to now have a bit of a discussion with those panelists we heard from earlier, just around some of the broader thematic areas that, or priorities that came out of those discussions. One thing that I saw that was quite interesting is there were discussions around how do you begin to shift the way things work. One of them was around, we heard from His Excellency, the Ambassador from Vanuatu, the High Commissioner, my apologies, from Vanuatu, around changing the way institutions in Australia charge scholarship fees. One of the other group discussions also talked about changing the way that aid is done. How do we build more ownership for communities? Again, in another group, we talked about how could Australia better support local institutions so that people educated in their home countries to further build their contextual knowledge of their countries, and how aid can be contextualized rather than bringing them into Australia. So I guess my first question to the panel would be, how would we begin to shift the way that aid is delivered? What could be done? Perhaps looking at it from your own technical areas of expertise from your organizations, but also within this room, if we're looking at, what could be done collectively, how can we begin to shift the way that aid is done? I might come to Pelenise first, given that you are our first presenter. What is your view on how we begin to shift the way aid is delivered?
When we were in the panel discussion, not panel discussion, in a breakup group, I actually raised a question on, how can we have trust funds for communities, which is a revolving fund. And I gave an example of, for example, like we have a project, a regional project, $10 million for communities. We will have that for 3 years and it's gone, finished. We hope that there's a change in communities because of that funding. And then we'll have to wait and write more project proposals for another 10 million or 9 million. So I suggested, the suggestion was this: how can we have a trust fund, community grants, foundation, so that it revolves and is always there to support communities? And it's not that it's given to them and they don't pay back. No, they work on it. That's where social enterprise comes in. They learn how to use it, pay back that money from what they're producing, and it continues. But there's some for social enterprise, some for their work in communities. What are their real needs? So we need funding for things like youth development, women development, disaster development in communities at a community level, and they have grants for this. So that's one of the things that I brought up. How can we create a trust fund for our people, and instead of writing project proposals all the time, at the same time, how do we connect with our donors, our partners, to continue to be there supporting us? But they do not have to create that fund every year after year, because the fund is there. It's already created. But they continue to build or transfer skills to us, and they do the research in whatever we are doing in the countries. But we do not have to keep, I don't want to use the word begging for money, no, but putting a trust so people can use it. A trust fund so people can use once and for all, that's it. But enough so that the people can use, and it's revolving all the time. That was something that we brought up, and it may be hard for donors. It's not something, because sometimes the donors want to keep on doing it's raising their flag, is this development really for the people, or for me to say, I'm doing something for you? We want something that is a long-term and create policies that will help that trust fund to grow and to help the people right at the community level. Yeah, something like that. I leave that to you to discuss and to.
Thank you, Berenice. And, I think the point you've just made is also really quite interesting. What could a looser model of development assistance look like? But also what are the incentives for it remaining the way it is? Basically what you've spoken about is that out of that development assistance, donors and development partners get access, credibility, and space. So it's not that it's just one-sided, and I think it's also need to shift away from what you say, what we sometimes use the language around begging for that sort of support. Thanks for that, Berenice, and just picking up on the point you said about knowledge and skills transfers. The group that talked about research collaboration, Focus Group 3, really talked a little about, how do you begin to build the capacity within specific institutions? How do you also begin to share expertise, knowledge, training, but build that capacity locally? And also, how would you have research support that does the legwork for those who have the specialized knowledge? So research support from Australia, from other countries, does the legwork for those who have the specialized knowledge. Espen, I know you spoke about an example from Vanuatu. Could you expand on that a little and also talk about what some of the implications there might be for shifting the way that development assistance is done?
Well, if I may, I think there's three prongs to this, but there may be more. I mean, the first one is, of course, we need to support further education, higher education, PhDs, masters, and so forth. We also need to support capacity supplementation in the communities. But the example that I gave, and High Commissioner, I'm pleased to say this was a very clever friend of mine from Vanuatu, who had studied the cyclone activity for years and years, and he had ascertained that some of the cyclones at the far ends of the cyclone season were some of the worst. And I told him, this is amazing, you need to publish this. And he said, I don't have time. I got a day job. So putting together some resources and then enabling him to work with some overseas researchers, he was able to actually publish a paper on this, and it got into an international journal, and it caused a big stir, because I mean, this was information that was important, not just for Vanuatu as a country, but it was important for the Pacific in the climate change negotiations, in understanding how we are affected by these climate change extreme events. So I think that's the third prong of the approach, is to enable professionals in Pacific Island countries who have this type of valuable information to be able to get it into the format that's required for the international level, because they want to see a peer reviewed. There's all sorts of rules around this. If it's peer reviewed, then it has to go to the international panel on climate change and so on. So I think it's really valuable if we could have this multi-pronged approach to promoting science, research, and cooperation in the region. We have to understand that like my friend, he's got a day job. He's not going to be able to sit down for 6 months to write up a scientific paper. But if he can get some assistance, he might be able to do it over time, and produce a scientific paper that is that's given the international recognition for the information that he's providing, and it goes beyond just meteorological stuff. I mean, we have information on traditional knowledge in the Pacific that needs to be documented and reported, because a lot of traditional knowledge is actually being proven as being scientifically rigorous. I mean, let me give you one example. In the Cook Islands, they have, in some of the islands there, they have a system called the Rawi system, where they divide a bay into 3 areas, and they never fish from the middle, but they fish from the left side for 1 year, and then they switch to the right side for another year. And they've been doing this for generations. And some scientists came in and really studied the issue, and they found that actually this works. So traditional knowledge was proven to be the most valuable management resource that they could put in place. So I just think that if we can have this sort of multi-pronged approach, yes, let's build up our cadre of Pacific scientists, but let's also support people in place who are working in different fields by supporting, mentoring, I don't know what you want to call it. And then thirdly, to have this capacity supplementation, whereby when these technical experts come into the country, they are followed throughout by at least 2 local experts. They will garner expertise from that exposure, and they will learn new things. And this gets to some of the points that were raised earlier about how do you write a TOR, how do you write a concept? All of this, it's for me, it's not difficult, but for some of the people I know, it'll be complex. So let's make sure that they have the support that will enable them to do these types of things. So there may be another 4 or 5 prongs to this approach, but those are my 3 that I would like to highlight. Thank you.
Thanks, Espen. It's really good to hear about those that specific example. I mean, I've also worked with a smaller development program in Fiji, which hires Australians for the most part, who are quite good at report writing, who shape things so that they're palatable for donors and development partners. So I really understand what you're saying, that research support is more a secretarial one that really benefits from the knowledge that is in the heads and of people that work on the ground. So we've also talked about the value of local knowledge that's technically sound. We've heard from Espen at SPC. I'd be interested to hear Easter what sort of support SPREP does, or what thinking SPREP has around this work of valuing local knowledge that's technically sound, and perhaps how we can even begin to influence donors and development partners to begin to value this local knowledge. Thank you, Easter.
Yeah, thank you, Benny. Of course, we very much work with our national counterparts, and local knowledge is very much key to the work that we do in country. Of course, like we mentioned in my introductory remarks, that the way we work is that we work with governments, but of course we also engage with the stakeholders in country. And so that's the modality that we work with. But one of the things that I would like to highlight is that the experience that we went through in the last 2 years with COVID, and where, realized that one, that we need to work more closely with local counterparts, with experts in country. However, the challenge is that there is very limited pool of experts in the area of environments, for example. So which requires us to look at how can we provide opportunities to further strengthen this capacity in country by way of perhaps more scholarships for researchers from Pacific Island countries to undertake research in the area of environments of interest to them that will meet the needs of the respective countries. And secondly, also, how can we strengthen the capacity of local universities so that they can themselves can also undertake some of this work in collaboration with organizations such as, for example. We do have, I mentioned the breakout group, that we do also have a lot of information that we have with us that is available to researchers on environmental data and information. We've established a number of national environmental data portals where researchers, and even it's available also to governments, ministries, and institutions to utilize and to also help with the planning and decision making in country. Of course, there are major gaps there as well, which area that needs to be further researched and to obtain further data that is not available currently. So there's a number of ways where, I think, in my view, there are opportunities for some level of collaboration and partnership, but with a focus on building capacity of our Pacific Island countries. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Easter, for that contribution. I'd like to pick up on the point that you'd made around, investing in or building the capacity of local tertiary institutions. And this is a point that really came up quite strongly in Breakout Room 4, the focus area 4 on teaching. So I'd like to hear from Bertha about some of the discussions they had. And also, Bertha, I know that in your group you talked about cultural competency for Pacific Islanders, but perhaps we can also pose a question to the group as well. I mean, you talked about cultural competency for Pacific Islanders in your group. Should we also be doing the same thing for Australians and others who come into the Pacific? Because we've talked about value and contextualized ways of working. Should we also be thinking about cultural competency for people coming to the Pacific? And what can you also share with us around what building the capacity of local tertiary institutions by donors and development partners, what might that look like? Thank you, Bertha.
Penny, before I answer the question, I just want to support what Espen was saying previously in regards to research collaboration, because there's a lot of elderly who will be taking their own cultural knowledge. I don't like to say traditional, because we are practicing those cultural knowledge, and most of them will be taking their knowledge with them. So I believe that's also one of the most urgent assistance that will be needed for research assistants to tag along the oldies and talk with them, follow them to the plantations, to the sea, because that's a lot to learn from the oldies, instead of introducing all these formal ways of research. Just be blend into their livelihoods, because in the Pacific, this is your livelihood. You cook food on the rocks, on the charcoal, and there was no NCDs back in the days. And nowadays, there's a lot of people who have diabetic, heart diseases because of Western food and processed foods in the shop. So that's research collaboration is most needed. And also, Easter, I'd like to say thank you to Spread for funding the new education department, streamlining of climate change into the curriculum. So looking forward to launching those publications. So that's another excellent way of the crop agencies helping out with the Pacific. But in terms of cultural competencies, I totally believe that Australia should also introduce cultural competencies we're just starting to learn about how teachers, our non-NUE teachers, can go to the villages and it's overnight camps, get to know the families, tag along with the students' families, who like families can adopt them for the day, but they'll be in the village hall. We take our own food, so we don't impose on them. I think that's very, very important. So teachers get to know where the students come from. They have to drive half an hour on this potholes road to school in town. It's not tar sealed, and so it's quite a lot of involvement. So after school, students go and feed the pigs, go to the sea, collect seashells, all sorts of things that impacts also their learning time. By the time they come and do their homework, they're tired. They need to sleep, catch the bus that's traveling at 6, 7 o'clock in the morning. So all those things also needs to be taken into consideration. So, when students are tired coming to class, that's already a barrier to their learning. So I think I've talked too much, but you can ask me questions. Thank you.
Not at all, but thank you for that. I mean, I think it's really important also that, hear about what the lived reality of Pacific students is like. We're running close to time, and I know that we've got to come to Q&A with participants, but I wonder if we might hear very quickly from Dr. Winnie, and then from His Excellency, the Ambassador, the High Commissioner. Dr. Winnie, just a quick question around, the community approaches that you talked about earlier and contextualized ways of working. How has today's discussion helped to focus perhaps the ways that regional international organizations work in the Pacific, and how we can influence donors and development partners as well?
Sorry, can you say that again, Penny? I didn't hear that, sorry.
No, that's fine, that's fine. Yeah, so my question is just, in your introduction, you spoke a little about
Penny?
Contextualized approaches. And I'm wondering if you could share with us what your program has been doing to ensure that, there's locally led development in the way that you're working.
This is really bad. This is really, I couldn't hear the whole sentence. I don't know what's going on.
I'll send you a message via chat, then you can respond to that. I'll send you a message. But we might just come to High Commissioner very quickly. We talked a little about, how do you begin to influence or advocate donor partners around, these major shifts. What's a starting point, for example, for you, Your Excellency?
Thank you, moderator. But before I go there, I just want to touch very quick little word on what Espen has said, our colleague here, and then also others have said around, expertise to the Pacific region. What we tend to see in the Pacific region, especially when it comes to projects and consultancies and all of that, a lot of donor partners, but also international organizations tend to do that when they come and get a local consultant, then they will pay them less than the one that is coming from, let's say, from the Netherlands or from the US or from somewhere else, yeah? And so this has been a practice that has been going on in this region for over decades and decades. And so like our sister from Birta was mentioning today about the local knowledge and the community and all of that, is that already in our practice, we undervalue the resources of the Pacific. Already there, the practice that we are practicing, the code of ethics of delivering that practice already is not good. So that, you know, we see our people as less worth than someone who will come from overseas and come and do a project in our region. Yes, I hear from the panelists that sometimes lack of expertise. I hear that from SPREP, but I think it's so important that these regional organizations, if they, I'm sure that they already have that, we need to create a database with experts from the Pacific region. Experts that are there that anybody can tap into them and take them. And when there are experts, they're not cheap. Like we always say, you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. These ones, they come with brains. And I always say, do not underestimate the Pacific, because the Pacific of today is different than the Pacific 40 years ago. Our people are highly educated in that region, whether in the region or whether in Australia or New Zealand or whether elsewhere, they're highly educated. And so the practice and to think that when you come into our region, that, you know, you will pay them less than someone that you would bring from Italy or from France or from anywhere else, that idea we need to stop. We need to stop that, because we need to value our local experts. We need to value them, and we need to give them what is due to them because of their studies. Because here today on this panel, we have doctors. We have doctors that are studying in Western system here. We have doctors, and I'm so proud to see them. And not only doctors, female doctors, which is another level higher. We talked a lot about gender. And so this is something that we need to promote in our region. We need to first and foremost value the resources that we have in the region. Even when we go to the community level, and some of us have said traditional knowledge, cultural knowledge, we can't, when someone died, they go with a whole library. So how do we value that? Even somebody who's sitting in the community is still as valuable as me sitting here in front of you, because their knowledge is power, knowledge is key. And so I want to mention that, but again, coming back to your ideas as well, in terms of how to strengthen this relationship and making work. For example, in the education sector, high school or primary school, why don't we come into programs where we exchange teachers? Some of our teachers can come and teach in Australia and see the Australian system, and can go to New Zealand and teach in New Zealand, and then vice versa. Bringing the teachers from Australia and New Zealand, coming and teaching in our region, exchanging teachers from Vanuatu and Fiji, exchanging them from Fiji and Australia, and so that, you know, we see different ways, so that our kids are seeing different ways as well of teaching, different models of teaching. Because then we have in our region, I'm not saying that we shouldn't have, we have international schools in the region, whereby it's all exclusive, yeah? It's all exclusive, you know, it's exclusivity. And yet we exclude a huge portion of the Pacific people that could not have the opportunities to have that. I understand that some institutions in the Pacific, high schools or primary schools, have already adopted some Australian curriculums in their you know, school curriculum, which is amazing. But we need that. We need that openness. We need that flow of information between Australia, New Zealand, and us in the Pacific, because we're a family. We're a family. I can't come, you cannot come into my region actually, or my country, and not trust my medical system, because you say this is the third world medical system. Whereas if you had given me the opportunity to study medicine in Australia, then maybe I might see differently. Then maybe when a patient, a tourist, our countries are heavily touristic. When a tourist from Australia goes to our hospitals, then we'll know that this medical doctor has studied in Australia. Then you will trust them. You will trust them, because that's the open up of the system. So we need, way forward, I think we need to open. You know, it's a both way direction. And again, I mentioned previously around visa conditions, visa waiver. I seriously think that the Pacific Island countries are not a threat to Australia or New Zealand. We do not have big number of refugees in both countries compared to some other countries that would have those refugees. So why are we still having these visa issues, visa waiver, that, you know, it'll take me 2 weeks to apply for a visa just to come to Australia, when Australia is just 3.5 hours away from my country, or from Brisbane is only 2.5 hours away, or 1 hour from Cairns. So you see, the complexities there is that we need to open up, so that there's flow of information, exchange of people, people to people connection, and then we can move on and we can find these other opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. Quite a few good points there. We might finally come to Dr. Winnie. The question we had was really around, you know, how is UNDP working in ways that ensure the work is locally led and informed by the local context. So over to you, Dr. Winnie, and then we'll come to a very quick Q&A. Okay, we might come back
Hello.
to.
You
Oh,
can
hello.
hear me
Sorry. Yes,
well?
yep. Yes, we can. Yeah, Naka. Yes, we can.
Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Danny. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. How is UNDP working in ways to ensure work is locally led and informed by the local context? It starts from consultations. When we go to the ground, we consult as widely as possible. From community, we just bring everybody together, from community to the various ministries, making sure that gender is taken, that there's a special gender studies and gender is taken into consideration. People with disabilities, marginalized people in society, like sections of society whose voices has to be heard, like the youth, the women, the old people, people with disabilities, and of course, when the project is implemented, we usually have a project management unit that is made up of nationals. Depending on the type of activities, if it's on the ground, then we will have community focal points. In the case of Marshall Islands or Tuvalu, it would be community or island coordinators, so that they locally lead on their islands, and they are the ones that inform us about the local context and lead at the local level. Thank you.
I think that's also a really good point. When you talked about it starting from consultation, that's really the ownership of the work from design through implementation through evaluation. All right, we have very few minutes, but I'd like to, if there are a couple of questions from other participants in the room, I'd like to give you a couple of minutes to just ask the panelists a couple of questions, and then we'll begin the wrap up for this afternoon. So happy to take questions if you'd like to unmute yourself to speak or to submit questions on the chat. Thank you. We have Karinaki Danielu with a question. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Penny. I'm very interested in the conversation where we begin to discuss the importance of incorporating local expertise in development, whether it be climate change adaptation. And I think the High Commissioner put it quite well, that we need to begin looking at the experts within the region. And I did discuss this a little bit in the breakout room that we had earlier, because there is a critical need to begin to appreciate the expertise that we have in the region. But more importantly for Australia, I think it's equally important that it begins to consider the investment it has made in terms of the expertise that it has built across the region. And then consider looking at ways in which it can refine the ways in which these issues keep recurring. And it's not a new issue, it's an ongoing issue. So my quick question, as far as quick can go, is this. How do we practically remove these barriers or these deficits that has for a long time given precedent to international consultants more so than local consultants? And I talk about this in a manner that I have with my own experience, because you would have a person from Kiribati and a person from Australia. They train in the same university, right? They receive the same qualifications. They go back to their respective homes. They apply for a job. But as the recruitment process proceeds and progresses, the thing that differentiates them is their country of origin. And of course, it's neo-colonial in precept and in its foundation. But is there a way that we can remove these barriers so that when people of the same expertise, of the same qualifications, apply for jobs, they would be given a fair chance. And I see this because I worked with the Australian government before within its Australian aid programs, and there are certain programs that we do. And let me give one example. There is this program called the PACTAM. So PACTAM is the Pacific Technical Advisory Mechanism, and the Australian government uses this prevalently in terms of providing expert advice and consultancies to Pacific Island countries. And when it does this, it kind of outsources the process to individual firms. In my case, I've been working with a firm, I had worked with a firm called Scope Global. So when Scope Global does advertisements for local consultants or for positions or expertise required within, for example, Kiribati, it does so by advertising internationally. And that's important because we need the best people by merit to take on these important and critical roles. But when people from Kiribati apply for these consultancies, what they face are comprehensible barriers to be able to be considered in the same wavelength of these experts from the Netherlands, from Italy, as the High Commissioner alluded to or referenced before. And when they do apply, what I find very difficult is the reasoning by Scope Global under their policy to say, no, we cannot employ this person because he or she does not have international experience. And I dwell on this for a long time because why would you first need international experience in these positions that are clearly focused on national development? And the second, what makes that person different from the same person within the country that has the same qualification, has the same level of training, has a PhD, has a master's degree, but do not qualify or do not meet the merits just because he or she comes from a certain point of origin within the Pacific. So when we begin these dialogue series and we begin thinking about how we can build better, genuine relationships, then I agree with the High Commissioner, we should begin to think about removing deficits that kind of exacerbate the divide between us as being a family, because we need to be thinking more of the Pacific as a family. And when Australia wants to play a part in that relationship, it needs to recognize that it has to consider us as a family. It should not differentiate us from other experts, other international consultants, and should begin to, I believe it would bode well for the Australian government to reinvest in the investments that it has made. It has paid for our PhD, our master's degrees. Why not consider us in terms of their own policies for recruitment in terms of consultancies? So sorry, Penny, I know this is as short as I can make it. It's a dialogue, of course, and I appreciate the time you have given me to take the floor.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. I think you've raised a lot of really important points there. So one of the things we can also be thinking about is not just advocating and influencing the donors and development partners, for example, but also private companies like managing contractors who also engage in the development space. I might come to Espen for our last question or comment. Thank you, Espen.
No, I just wanted to react to that, and let me preface this by saying that I'm Norwegian by birth, but I'm imported and adopted by the Marshall Islands. But I have to say that when we were establishing the regional technical support mechanism under the Asian Development Bank, I was outraged by those conditions that Mr. Tanielo just outlined. International consultants were going to be given a certain rate, but local consultants were basically going to be given car fare and food. And we argued with them that this is simply outrageous, and they said, no, that's the rules. So Easter has posted on the chat that the new version of this RTSM is going to be launched soon. And one of the things that we removed from, this was when I was still working at SPREP, I'm now with SBC, we removed that clause about how local consultants were not going to be given the same consideration as international consultants. I mean, it was outrageous, but there was, you're dealing with Asian Development Bank. They tell you that this is the way it's going to be, and it's not fair. It's not just, but it's what we have to deal with. So hopefully, moving forward, when SPREP launches the new RTSM, which I think is going to be called Tuamai Pacifique, we will not have this type of discrimination against local experts. And I totally agree with Mr. Tanielu that why do you need international expertise when what you're really required to be addressing are very localized and national concerns? It just does not make any sense. You need to get the right person for the job. And an international expert, well, from Norway, probably wouldn't fit the job.
Thank you, Espen, for that contribution. And again, it's someone spoke earlier about Vuvalia families, but I think we should also recognize that families can also have robust discussions, and some of those are about us pushing back and engaging with development partners and donors to really talk about the inequities, the inherent inequities of the system. Huh? All right, we have, I think, one question that came in on the chat that talked about just responding to His Excellency. Thank you very much. Channels should be built to open up to the Aboriginal community. I think the platform, the community needs a platform to perform, to present themselves and gain enough trust from external environments. Do you know of any relevant project opportunities that we could participate in or help? So just to the High Commissioner, that question.
Sorry, I didn't hear the whole question. You
know of any relevant projects, opportunities that people can participate in to work with Aboriginal communities, to give them a platform?
Thank you. I think with the recent announcement of having also the First Nation and the First Nation people of Australia figure it in the foreign policy of the Australian government, this is a good step that we would welcome to work closely with them, and especially ensuring that we exchange knowledge. We exchange traditional knowledge, because a lot of I've traveled a lot across this country, and I've noticed that the First Nations and Torres Strait Islanders as well have a lot of similar practice, whether it be for protection towards environment or marine resources and all of that. They have a lot of similar practices as us. And I think this would be a great opportunity to build on that and having a sort of a cultural diplomacy. You've all been aware that, now cover has been allowed to be imported to Australia, and thanks to all the Pacific Island countries that have worked really hard in ensuring that cover can enter the Australian market. It's still under the pilot project. What happened during the ban of cover, the main reason behind that was that cover was abused in the Indigenous communities across Australia, and I think particularly in Arnhem Land. Vanuatu, for a fact, we proposed to have a cultural diplomacy, having a trip up there. At that time we were discussing it, but COVID stopped everything. We wanted to go up there and have a cultural dialogue in explaining to our brothers and sisters in Arnhem Land what cover is all about, because people have a lot of misconception of what cover is all about. And also in the cities, I've noticed that a lot of people think that cover is a drug or a narcotic. And so that is because we haven't had enough good communication around cover, and also having this cultural diplomacy as well with the people that are affected by cover here in Australia. And so again, I'll come back to the diaspora. The diaspora is quite significant in Australia, Pacific diaspora in Australia. That too is something that is a tool that we can use actually in leveraging our work with the First Nation community. And some of our diasporas have culture background in terms of being not only from the Pacific, but also Torres Strait and also Aboriginal as well. And so they have these three mixed in them. And so how do we tap into that? How do we tap into their pure value, making sure that we look into this comparative advantage and said, okay, how do we work closely with them and ensuring that, you know, we can have this exchange with the First Nation community across Australia. And I think with the recent policies that the Australian government has announced that the First Nation will be part of that, of their foreign policy, that is a great, to me, I think personally is a great step forward for us to engage more meaningfully with the First Nation people. And, you know, we've had a lot of difficulties as well in with our labor mobility, because a lot of our workers coming from the Pacific to this country, they did not know that there are First Nation people in this country already, there are Indigenous people of this country. And then they go into a lot of fightings, physical fightings, you know, there's a lot of problems between our workers and the Indigenous communities as well. But that's once again, because we do not understand, they do not understand that they're coming to a land that is also, you know, Indigenous as their own land back home. And so there's a lot of good lessons learned that we learned from that. And now we are building a cultural framework around labor mobility so that we can explain to our people and also to their employers in Australia that, you know, not only their employers will understand where they come from in terms of the culture and tradition, but also the Australian people to understand them as well, but to understand that, you know, our people can also understand that there are First Nation people in this country, there are Indigenous people in this country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Excellency. All right, I'd like to thank everyone for your participation this afternoon. My apologies that we can't take any further questions at this time, but the Padlet boards that you've all worked on in your 4 different focus groups will remain open until Sunday evening. So if you'd like to, you know, to add additional comments, please feel free to do so. And the team at the University of Queensland will seek to respond to you as soon as possible. Please also just remember to include your name under which you're registered so that they can respond appropriately to the right people. Thanks again, everyone, for participating this afternoon. It looks like there's some quite broad themes emerging out of this discussion. And I've been assured that the UQ team will be looking at progressing these in some post-event workshops that will be coming up soon. So keep an eye out for some of those events that are coming up. Would like to now hand over to the Pro-Vice Chancellor, Mr. Brett Lovegrove, to give some closing remarks. Thank you, Mr. Lovegrove.
Thank you, Penny. And good afternoon, everyone. It's been a pleasure to be here for the 3rd edition of the Global Development Dialogue. I was recently appointed as the Pro-Vice Chancellor Global Partnerships at the University of Queensland, and this is the first time for me meeting many of you and attending one of these series. Since coming on board, I've been briefed on the key partnerships where UQ is working with leading institutions to strengthen our links and to have meaningful and real impact in global communities. Can I say, though, that the work of the Global Development Hub stands out amongst all of the initiatives we undertake. It's not just because of the vision, but also because of the way it has sparked discussion between experts from across the university, government and industry. I'd like to take a minute to thank all of our speakers who have kindly taken the time to lend their expertise and share a nuanced understanding of very complex issues. I was just listening into the questioning then and extremely impressed by the quality of the questions we've all been asking and the information that's coming back. The insights that you've developed and the knowledge on how we can strengthen existing partnerships and develop mutually beneficial relationships across the Pacific are really clear. I'd also like to extend my thanks to our University of Queensland facilitators, both those we can see and those who are behind the scenes, for supporting the breakout rooms and for the contributions in their fields. A special thank you to Tapanaga Junior and the members of the UQ South Pacific Islander Association for sharing your unique perspective on what it means to be a Pacifica student at UQ. And finally, to all of our audience members, both from the university and from across the Pacific and beyond, thank you for choosing to attend today's event in the spirit of collaboration. We're grateful for you giving your time to this important dialogue session. It's encouraging to join a group that has such clear goals and is identifying practical and tangible solutions. Today's topics pave the way for us to include our Pacific partners at the core of global engagement. If genuine partnership is to take place, Pacifica peoples must be included in all stages of the development process, from the initial concept to the design stage to project bids and funding applications. And importantly, as we were hearing and discussing at the end, to locally lead implementation. We should continue to embrace local knowledge at all stages and ensure our work is fully realised and is impactful. Of course, our partnerships must be culturally competent, recognising our differences as strengths, not weaknesses, and allowing for the flexibility in the way we engage. Just because we have always done things in a certain way doesn't mean we can't make room for change. We should always be asking ourselves, what are we trying to achieve? How can we do this better? And how can we be flexible to incorporate new knowledge and perspectives as they emerge across the region? As we've heard today, our partnerships must be enduring and sustainable. If we work in silos, it is guaranteed that our projects will remain finite. Instead, we will work laterally across our focus areas of development, research, teaching, government and industry engagement. If we do so, we can safeguard more meaningful partnerships and make a real difference to the livelihoods of our people and our communities in the future. At a local level, I will always advocate for us continuing to work together and to create this kind of culture at UQ across our teaching, learning and research. Australia and the University of Queensland should take on the role of being more than just a partner for change. We must be an advocate for real and meaningful impact. We must advocate for responding to climate change, for improved environmental practices, for inclusive and genuine partnerships, and for continued learning. It was inspiring this afternoon to hear from such active community leaders. Berenice, thank you for putting it in such clear words that are going to resonate with me. You reminded us to always ask the question, who are we doing this for? Centre of development work is the people. So how can we connect with them and be part of them? While we may work through government, private sector and NGOs, it's critical that we reach people themselves and we have the tools on hand to assist. This is certainly a sentiment that was echoed by His Excellency the High Commissioner, Easter, Espen, and many of our other speakers today. I took away the message that if we don't have the tools or the partnerships to progress, then we need to work together to create them. In terms of concrete action after today, as Penny mentioned at the end, our Global Development Hub will now form a dedicated series of workshops to unpack many of the solutions and ideas that were brought up in the dialogue. We're always looking at ways of creating new opportunities and partnerships in the Pacific region, and it's events like today that really keep our momentum going. Of course, the benefits from an event like today are not only the information we've shared, but in the many connections that have been established. We'll take forward the ideas from today and identify additional ways we can utilise our people-to-people links to support the Global Development Hub and to advocate for stronger partnerships with our neighbouring regions. This is certainly something I'll be focusing in my role as PVC Global Partnerships. I'm working closely with a great team of people to lead the development and implementation of the university's global strategy. This includes the delivery of the global initiatives and programs designed to extend our global impact. Discussions like those we've had today help us shape our global initiatives and programs so that we can maximise the real-world impact of our world-leading research and development expertise. So thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak with you, and thank you all for attending. We appreciate the time you've given up to join us today, particularly to our government and industry partners. I really look forward to working with you through the Global Development Hub, and I'm always available to connect over a coffee or on a Zoom. Just get in touch with me. Penny, over to you to wrap up. But again, thank you all for participating. And Penny, thank you for emceeing today's session so diligently. You've done a fantastic job. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lovegrove, and thanks everyone for participating this afternoon. As we've heard, the University of Queensland will be looking at ways to both integrate this into the ways it's working internally, as well as the way it engages within the Pacific. So I'm sure we can look forward to some further discussions and workshops that will be coming out of this. Thanks everyone for your contributions today. Special thanks to the panelists for contributing their time, expertise, and frankness to the discussions this afternoon. I think it's been really great to have those robust discussions today. Hopefully this is not the last time we do that. Thanks again to everyone attending and to the team at the Global Development team at the University of Queensland. Thanks for your time. Good afternoon and goodbye.